He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, March 28th, 2025, the 68th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A happy birthday out there to PJ, and I believe to Polymathanon as well. Happy birthday to both of you. Thank you very much for your consistent support, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. And with that, let's get into it, and we will start with the one and only Twinkle Toes Tim Walz, the man who portrayed the Democrat vice presidential candidate in the fake election campaign of 2024. Here he is. We talked the other day, we featured Rosie O'Donnell passing around baseless conspiracies and evidence-free claims about election rigging to favor Donald Trump, like it was 2016, 2017 all over again. And here we have a conspiracy by, I want to say this woman, but it's a Democrat.
I hope they all have seen the report from cybersecurity experts that they've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that shows some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. My biggest fear is that we're not going to make it to the midterms. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah. Well, this one's the core. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote. This is one of the things, though, that this is going to take power to the streets. I don't know what the answer is on this.
So Tim Walz kind of, and I know that clip was a little quiet. I'm sorry about that. Tim Walz kind of slides around that question. He's presented with baseless claims about election rigging and election interference in Clark County, Nevada, of all places, where, of course, the Uniparty is well in control, running Harry Reid's election system as they have been for quite a long time. I am more than happy for this lady to bring out whatever evidence of election rigging she has in Clark County. And I would be more than happy to say, you nailed it, lady. You're onto something. We definitely have rigged elections in Clark County. Interestingly, she also brought up the idea that the 2026 midterms might be canceled. We talked about that just the other day in the article from Democracy Docket. The illegitimate Arizona Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, who was right at the heart of the steal in 2020 in Arizona, said that he believed the Trump administration wants to cancel the 2026 elections so that he and his party can stay in power, and we have to fight like hell against that by every means available. Now, it's entirely possible that this person this questioner of Tim Walz at that town hall style event that Beto O'Rourke also attended. It's possible that that person just read Adrian Fontes's comments, but it sounds like that is a narrative that is beginning to bubble up on that side of the fence, and more power to them, to be honest. I mean, we can laugh in their faces when they say that Donald Trump won through a stolen election. That's clearly ridiculous, but our elections are fake. Donald Trump won his mandate by his overwhelming popularity based on who Donald Trump is, the media operation, and what we have learned about the global regime and the Donald Trump alternative, what it is he's fighting over these last many years. We talked on Wednesday about the fake election, the recent fake election, Tuesday's fake election in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And former Donald Trump spokesperson was out there yesterday addressing that election result that Scott Presler has guaranteed to everyone was a totally legitimate result. Republicans just straight up lost that election. There was no rigging involved. We talked about that. I joined the guys on Devolution Power Hour on Wednesday evening and discussed a bit of that. And while there might be no hard evidence available, this is what I said on Wednesday, that particular election was rigged to the extent that I cannot produce for you the fraudulent votes, which is, the evidence that the court accepts. We have no such standards, okay? It is incumbent upon the people holding elections and taking power through elections to prove to the public, whenever the public has questions, that the elections were held totally above board and thereby capable of conveying legitimacy onto the politicians then assuming office. And our system doesn't allow for anything close to that. Even if there is no hard evidence of an election rigging, the hard evidence has already been produced for year after year after year that our elections, again, are incapable of producing legitimacy. So here was former Trump spokeswoman Liz Harrington on Truth Social yesterday. She said something stinks in Pennsylvania. The 36th district has not had a Democrat state senator since it moved from Philadelphia to Lancaster County in 1979. Lancaster County went plus 16 for Trump just 4 months ago. And yet we're supposed to believe Republicans put the Democrat candidate over the top with mail-in votes, i.e., there were more mail-in votes for the Democrat candidate than Democrat voters who requested them. So that right there would be the sort of thing that should indicate to somebody that the election was rigged. But Scott Presler is just doing what Scott Presler does. And what Scott Presler does is talk incessantly about how he is registering voters. And we should, as always, note and point out that registering voters provides the raw material for election rigging. The election rigging system is based on the availability of voter registrations that can be then turned into whatever votes are necessary to achieve the results already determined. Randy Fine, we talked about that the other day on Wednesday, the upcoming special elections down in Florida to replace both Mike Waltz and Matt Gaetz. And Ron DeSantis' claims that Randy Fine was going to have a very difficult time winning his race. He might still get over the finish line, but he was going to have a really difficult time of it. And it was no reflection on Donald Trump. Trump actually phoned into a tele-rally yesterday in support of Randy Fine. So we will see how that goes next Tuesday. And we'll talk about the Elise Stefanik and some of the other kind of fallout of this current election cycle in these special elections a little bit later on. John Harold Patel Patriot had Leah Hoopes from Delaware County, Pennsylvania, on the Daily Herald yesterday, and I wanted to share a bit of that conversation with you.
This election system is legitimate, and it's your fault for not voting hard enough. But they demand us prove the election was fake when they can't even prove the election was legitimate.
Right. So what people don't understand is their own rights. You have a 10th Amendment power as the people, and we are a checks and balance system to our government. You have a First Amendment right to redress your government and file your petitions and file lawsuits and speak freely. And I will continue to criticize my government and tell them that the onus is on them to prove that they ran a free and equal election. It's not on me. It's not on me to prove anything. But I want to go back to what you were talking about in Lancaster County. What Scott seems to not include in that post is that it was Josh Parsons who just ran for the special elections who, with the help of others, uncovered the fact of those voter registrations, the fake ones that they used in 2024 was connected to GBI strategies. So if you remember that whole piece of information where they did all those raids, I believe it was Louisiana. It was like a shell company where they were sending out a whole bunch of people to file for voter registration all across the country. And they got caught. They were raided. It was this whole big operation. So that was uncovered by Josh Parsons, who, magically just lost the special elections. But don't forget, voters, it's your fault.
People get very upset when we're like, hey, maybe Scott Pressler going out and registering voters and acting like that is going to win elections for Republicans. Maybe that's not as heroic as he himself portrays it to be. And of course, there's the $5 million that he has reportedly received from none other than Charlie Kirk at Turning Point USA. Checking on the chat quickly, Polymathodon $5. APL wants to wish PJ Corrigan a happy birthday, and the only way she can let's show her doing that the only way she knows how. It often reminds me of the scene in Seinfeld. There was an episode that they kind of spoofed the movie Speed, which is about a bus being hijacked. And there was a bus being hijacked. Kramer had to take over and start driving the bus. And he says to Jerry, or maybe to George, or George and Jerry, that at the next stop, he opens the door and kicks the hijacker out. And they're like, you kept making the stops? And Kramer, in the way that only Kramer can respond, says, they kept ringing the bell. And one of my favorites, my very, very favorite Seinfeld scenes, no doubt. And I'm a big fan of Michael Richards. I think that Seinfeld is hilarious. And, say what you will, Jason Alexander is a huge communist, and Larry David maybe as well. But Larry David, despite how much he says awful things about Donald Trump, seems like he's got something slightly different going on. And I've talked to a few of my friends, Jewish friends, around the entertainment industry in Hollywood. And I'm like, is Larry David like secretly undercover pro-Trump? And it's possible. And of course, Cheryl Hines, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s wife, played Larry David's wife on Curb Your Enthusiasm. So I don't know, something very interesting going on there. Let us get back on track. We're going to switch gears slightly. Elon Musk just did a long interview with his Doge team in the background with none other than Fox News' Brett Baier, the man who called Arizona in 2020, and the guy who tried to steer Trump off course while Trump was making it very clear to the American public that no one should believe the reported results of our fake elections. And let's just, we're going to transition from the election part of the show into this other part. So let's
Sports
go.
has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say
is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
The whole thing is ridiculous. So Elon Musk sat down with Bret Baier and he brought back up. We talked, I guess, a month or two ago at this point. We're basically 10 weeks into the new Trump term. The time is flying right by. But we talked about the iron mine. I think it's called Iron Mountain or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was named. But the place where they store all the documents, when we were discussing David Rubenstein and the National Archives and the rest of it, Elon Musk took the opportunity to explain that story at greater length.
I bumped into Anthony and Elon probably back in February, and they told me something about a mine that was dealt with retirement, and they said they needed somebody to help out to fix retirement in the government. I love the challenge, so I jumped on board, and it turns out there is actually a mine in Pennsylvania that houses every paper document for the retirement process in the government. Now, picture this.
And there it was, by the way, Iron Mountain. Okay. Glad that my memory didn't completely fail me.
This giant cave has 22,000 filing cabinets, stacked 10 high to house 400 million pieces of paper. It's a process that started in the 1950s and largely hasn't changed in the last 70 years. And so as he dug into it, we found retirement cases that had so much paper, they had to fit it on a shipping pallet. So the process takes many months, and we're going to make it just many days.
Will it be digitized or how?
Absolutely. So this will be an online digital process that will take just a few days at most. And I really think, it's an injustice to civil servants who are subjected to these processes that are older than the age of half the people watching your show tonight. So we really believe that the government can have an Apple Store-like experience, beautifully designed, great user experience, modern systems.
Because right now it's by hand.
Yes, but the retirement process is all by paper, literally with people carrying paper in manila envelopes into this gigantic mine.
So they can't retire more than a certain number every month?
Yes.
About 8,000 a month.
That's how the reason we discovered it was we were saying, like, well, let's encourage voluntary retirement. I said, well, most they could do is 8,000 a month. And even under normal circumstances, it can take 6 to 9 months just to have your retirement paperwork processed. And they often get the calculations wrong. So we're like, well, why would it take so long to retire? And they're like, well, because of the mine. They're like, what do you mean a mine? What's a mine got to do with retiring? And that's where we discovered that all the retirement stuff is still done by paper in a process that looks identical to what occurred in the 1950s. Like, we took a snapshot of the mine when it first started in the 50s to today. It looks the same.
It's amazing. So how long do you think it will take to turn over?
We're working as fast as we can. Probably next couple of months we'll have this overhauled. And, I really think, again, like, why are we subjecting our federal workers to processes that they actually have to go through a training just to retire from the government? There's a whole training program that people have to go through in order to retire. I think we can do better for them.
Well, if you can't do better than that, then we are really screwed. The truth is, the whole thing just needs to be torn down. That is unbelievable. It's fun to hear that story at greater length. I don't know, maybe someone in the chat who watched the entire interview or has paid attention to the conversation to follow on X, formerly Twitter, might know the answer to this. But is any of those guys big balls? Gosh. Let us continue with one more clip from that interview, and hat tip to my pal Patriots in Control for clipping these.
Tom Krause, working at Treasury, you are having access to the payment system, oversees all the outgoing payments. Essentially, those payments were going places we didn't know where they were going, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case, Brett. As an ex-CFO of a big public tech company, really what we're doing is we're applying public company standards to the federal government. And it is alarming how the financial operations and financial management is set up today. There is actually really only one bank account that's used to disperse all monies that go out of the federal government.
Time out. One bank account.
It's a big one.
It's a big one.
It's a big one.
It's a big one. A couple weeks ago, it had $800 billion in it, but it's the Treasury General account. So when you hear, some of my colleagues here, what they're talking about in terms of the fraud, you have to ask, well, why is this allowed to happen at a financial level? Well, it's actually quite simple but alarming. The Treasury up until now, and thanks to President Trump, we're fixing this. In fact, there's an executive order that he just signed the other day, which is protecting America's bank account, because it really is the taxpayers' money. One, we're changing the culture. The culture is been not a lot of caring and not a lot of commitment to doing what's right relative to financial operations. There's $500 billion of fraud every year. There's hundreds of billion dollars of improper payments, and we can't pass an audit. The consolidated financial report is produced by Treasury, and we cannot pass it on. We have material weaknesses. What that means is that if I was a public company CFO, I would effectively be removed. I couldn't file financial statements. I couldn't issue securities.
Never pass an audit?
Can't pass an audit.
Right. The federal government cannot pass an audit. It's impossible. In fact, in order to pass an audit, you need the information necessary to pass an audit. You need to have the payment codes, you need to have the payment explanation, and you need to have a person you can contact to understand why that payment was made. None of those things were mandatory until just recently, just a few weeks ago. In fact, maybe last week.
Yeah, we're serving 580 plus agencies, and up until very recently, effectively they could say make the payment, and Treasury just sent it out as fast as possible. No verification. And so what we're doing is what any household would do. But imagine you're a household, you have a bank account, everyone has an ATM card connected to that account, everyone has a checkbook connected to that account. It's not just your children, it's not just your parents, it's your in-laws, it's your extended family, and they all can go to the account and disperse funds. No questions asked, no justification, no verification.
Yeah, I would think that would not be a good system. Why would a system like that ever be set up if the people setting up the system believed they had any responsibility to the American public or any chance to ever be held accountable? And of course, those are the critical things to understand about this, is that A, they're not working on behalf of the American public. It's almost like they're a government for someone else. And they don't believe there's any chance they'll ever be held accountable. And another example of extraordinary government waste and inefficiency. And if you watched Badlands Daily, some of this is going to be a bit of a rerun for you. Brian brought this clip up today as well. This is Jon Stewart, formerly of The Daily Show, and maybe he still hosts The Daily Show, I think, once a week or something, along with Ezra Klein, who used to be the editor of Vox. And I think he's at the New York Times or one of the other commie outlets at this point. But they are having a discussion about government inefficiency relative to the rollout of spending for rural broadband. Here we go.
We have to issue the notice finding opportunity within 180 days. That's step one. Step two, which all 56 state applicants completed, is states who want to participate must submit a letter of intent. After they do that, they can submit a request for up to $5 million in planning grants. Then the NTIA, step four, has to review and approve and award, again, planning grants, not broadband grants, planning grants.
And it's still at the NTIA. It's still at the first step.
All right, so the NTIA must issue a NOFO within 180 days. States who want to participate must submit their letter of intent. Step three, they can request up to $5 million in planning grants.
Just planning.
Just planning. Step four, the requests are reviewed, approved, and awarded by the NTIA, which currently all 56, 3 years later, all 56 applicants had passed through at least step five. It took more than 3 years. So it's a long time. States must submit a 5-year action plan. So the states kind of go back and they kind of think about how they're going to do this. And they don't just say, okay, thank you for the money. We're going to spend it. And you can see how it worked out later. We're like, here's our 5-year action plan. Then the FCC must publish the broadband data maps before NTIA allocates funds. So having done the NOFO, the letters of intent, the request for planning grants, then the review, approval, and awarding of the planning grants, then the 5-year action plans. In between that, the federal government has to put forward a map saying where it thinks we need rural broadband subsidies. And then, of course, the states need an opportunity to challenge the map for accuracy. And you can imagine this doesn't all happen in like a day. Okay. So then the NTIA, step 7, has to use the FCC maps to make allocation decisions. Then, having already done their letter of intent, their request for planning grants, it's hard even to talk about this, man. Step 7 is NTIA must use the FCC maps that were already challenged for allocation decisions. Then, having submitted all this, I think this one is actually quite amazing. Yeah. Having submitted their 5-year plans or letters of intent, step 8 is states must submit an initial proposal to the NTIA. Then,
is that the result of their $5 million?
And so it goes on like this for another 3 minutes. There are 12 steps in that process. And by the end of it, Jon Stewart is jumping out of his chair, running around, pulling his hair out. It's a massive clown show, of course. He's acting. Jon Stewart knows why he's bringing Ezra Klein on. I'm sure he's gone through this story with Ezra Klein before. He's aware of generally what's going to be said. So all of this is just the most ridiculous acting. But the point, as I made this morning on Badlands Daily, is that these are the people who support the system that creates these situations over and over and over again. These are the people who support big government and defend big government and the role of government, the expansion of government, why we need government, et cetera, on down the line. These are massive supporters of the global regime and its agenda in full. They are purveyors of the central narrative and the uniparty left version of the central narrative. So they're in no place to speak. But the strange thing is, all of a sudden, we have the uniparty left, standard issue villagers on the uniparty left, agreeing that something is very, very wrong in how government is run and creating the desire now to make government run more efficiently. And the purpose of all this is not to make government run more efficiently. It's to remove government from our lives. At least that's what it is for MAGA, for the America First crowd. And we certainly hope for Donald Trump. And it's our duty, obviously, to push him in that direction. But the goal is not to make government ultimately efficient with all of these powers that it has. Now, is that Elon Musk's goal? It could be Elon Musk's goal. We can hope that it's not. And again, we need to pressure to make sure that that's not the ultimate goal. But there are plenty of supporters of Elon Musk and Doge, plenty of opponents of government inefficiency that want the government to still do all of these things. And they will make the practical arguments on why government should do all these things and should be allowed to do all these things. Well, that's not our argument. It's certainly not my argument. Government shouldn't be doing any of these things, really. We can scale that back and say most of these things, but it's pretty close to none of these things that government should be doing. It's not government's responsibility to supply places with internet service. Now, if government's going to do that, we can have a practical conversation about how that can best be done. It seems like it might best be done by Starlink, which is a government-affiliated company that is potentially supplying broadband internet access for everyone, everywhere, at all times. And the hope is that it's done through a series of decentralized nodes that cannot be disrupted from a kind of central hub, which is the situation we have now, and a situation, as we've discussed many times, that we saw play out in the aftermath of January 6th in 2021, where apps like Parler, for instance, were shut down at centralized hubs controlled by Amazon Web Services. So when we think about that alternate information infrastructure being the right word is erected, but it's so hard to say that now after we've seen Democrats for years talking about Donald Trump inciting an erection. So I'm extra sensitive. That's not the right word to use either. About describing it that way. But as this alternate information infrastructure is being built up, on one hand, the pushback to that would be the creation of this massive broadband effort to have the old system more easily available to everybody. If they know that the system's got to reach everybody at some point, they would prefer it to be on their version rather than the new version, potentially, right? This is speculation. And so roadblocks in the path of getting that job accomplished are can be viewed in in different ways, particularly when it's stuff being done by the fake and illegitimate Biden administration over the last 4 years. It kind of begins to sound at that point like potentially, at least, some ghosts may have been involved in that particular machine. All right. We are going to switch gears once again to the White House. Yesterday, Donald Trump with more executive orders. And we discussed on Wednesday some of the pushback to the law firms that had submitted to Donald Trump's pressure, and Trump going after 4 law firms, 4 major white shoe DC law firms at that point. We talked about Covington and Burling, the relationship to Jack Smith, Paul Weiss law firm related to Mark Pomerantz, who then went to New York to push the prosecution of Donald Trump by Alvin Bragg. We had Perkins Coie with lawfare attorney Mark Elias, and I think it's Jenner and Block with Andrew Weissman. They were the most recent. Now, Paul Weiss was one of those that had submitted. Perkins Coie, that Trump action is being challenged in court. And then yesterday we have another with Wilmer Hale. So here is the fact sheet on that from whitehouse.gov. Addressing rogue law firms. President Trump believes that lawyers and law firms that engage in conduct detrimental to critical American interests should not be subsidized by American taxpayers or have access to our nation's secrets. And that is the most obvious thing, stripping them of their security clearances and making sure that they are not being given government contracts. Basic stuff. Wilmer Hale, the fact sheet says, has abandoned the legal profession's highest ideals and abused its pro bono practice to engage in activities that undermine justice and the interests of the United States. Wilmer Hale pursues partisan goals, supports efforts to discriminate on the basis of race, and backs the obstruction of efforts to prevent illegal aliens from committing horrific crimes and trafficking deadly drugs within our borders. And so they are going after the work that Wilmer Hale has done on behalf of the regime and its global slave trade. And they consistently go after these law firms because of their hiring practices, their discrimination on the basis of race, and occasionally gender is involved there as well, often described under the DEI umbrella. But the good thing about that part is that there is a body of law about non-discrimination in the handing out of government contracts. So Trump is taking that weapon and using it against the regime and saying, actually, your DEI practices are a wonderful example of discriminating based on race or gender. And so we are going to eliminate your government contracts on that basis. Now, it's being described as Trump going after law firms that had gone after Trump. So this is, quote unquote, revenge. But he's providing these other bases for going after these law firms that are much harder to challenge. Wilmer Hale has furthered the degradation of the quality of American elections by supporting efforts designed to enable non-citizens to vote. It's a big one. Wilmer Hale has been accused of discriminating against its own employees on the basis of race and other categories prohibited by civil rights laws, including through the use of race-based targets. Wilmer Hale rewarded Robert Mueller and 2 of his colleagues by welcoming them to the firm after they wielded the power of the federal government to lead a partisan, quote-unquote, investigation against the president and others. Mueller's investigation epitomizes the weaponization of government. And I'm going to just search for one thing, hold for processing just quickly here, because that was fruitless, but let us continue. My hold for processing was fruitless, I mean. Truth Social today. This is another major law firm. And this came out an hour or so ago. Donald Trump and Skadden Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom announced the following agreement regarding a series of actions to be taken by Skadden. And this is very much along the lines of the response by Paul Weiss. 1. Skadden will provide a total of at least $100 million in pro bono legal services during the Trump administration and beyond to causes that the president and Skadden both support in relation to the following areas: assisting veterans and other public servants, including members of the military, law enforcement, first responders, and federal, state, and local government officials, ensuring fairness in our justice system, and combating anti-Semitism. Skadden will change its pro bono policy so that all pro bono moving forward will be done in the firm name. A pro bono committee will be constituted to ensure that pro bono matters are consistent with the objectives of the program and that pro bono activities represent the full political spectrum. So they're going to have to do pro bono work on behalf of MAGA interests, America First interests, rather than on behalf of the regime, which is on whose behalf they've been working previously, and why, as we discussed the other day, people in the regime were so upset. That's kind of the cause of that Atlantic op-ed, and maybe I'll find that in a second and pull that back up quickly. Number 2, the Skadden Foundation will commit to the mission of providing, pro bono legal services to a wide variety of deserving organizations and individuals. Skadden is committed to funding no fewer than 5 Skadden Fellows each year dedicated to the following projects: assisting veterans, ensuring fairness in our justice system, combating anti-Semitism, once again, and other similar types of projects. Law graduates that receive Skadden Fellowships will represent a wide range of political views, including conservative ideals. And, I know that the combating anti-Semitism gets a lot of people suspicious of the intent of some of this, that Donald Trump is somehow a captured asset of Zionists. Can't prove to you that he's not. At the same time, I think that it makes sense understanding that the regime's ultimate card, it's not a Trump card because it's not going to work, and it's also not a Trump card if you're playing it against Trump. But one of the narrative end goals for the regime is to turn Donald Trump into Hitler and all of us into Nazis. And this is something we've been talking about for the last couple of years. So with that in mind, it's a lot less offensive to me that Donald Trump is making it quite clear to everyone and allowing the argument to be had again and again online that Donald Trump is not going after the Jews. He's not anti-Semitic, and he certainly then cannot be Hitler in their narrative, no matter how they get there. And so that is why I am patient on this stuff. Otherwise, I might share people's concerns about some of this language. Like, really? This is what, an anti-racist effort? It's not the way politics should be done on the basis of racial and ethnic groups. And I totally agree with that point. And I think that there may be more to it than that. Number 3, Skadden affirms its commitment to merit-based hiring, promotion, and retention. Accordingly, the firm will not engage in illegal DEI discrimination and preferences. Skadden will engage independent outside counsel to advise the firm to ensure employment practices are fully compliant with law, including, but not limited to, anti-discrimination laws. So that is very interesting. They're going to have to hire an outside firm to make sure that Skadden's own hiring practices will actually comport to these anti-discrimination laws rather than them just discriminating by choice whenever they want to fulfill racial quotas and race-based agendas on behalf of the global regime. Number 4, Skadden will not deny representation to clients, such as members of politically disenfranchised groups who have not historically received legal representation from major national law firms, including in pro bono matters and in support of nonprofits because of the personal political views of individual lawyers. And this can be read at least as the opposite of the sentiment that a lot of people assume when it comes to the anti-Semitism litigation. Groups that have not historically received legal representation from major national law firms. Well, maybe those are Christian groups, for instance. I can't imagine that they are necessarily pro-white groups, but pro-Christian groups you could see as part of this, or people who are gone after to make political points, like the owner of a cake shop, for instance, who doesn't want to create cakes for gay weddings because he doesn't approve of gay marriage. Will the white shoe DC law firms now have to act in adherence to the actual standards that have been set for so long, that are only applied to one side and never to the other, and force these law firms to do what they are ostensibly supposed to do rather than just use the law to help the regime implement the agenda here in the United States through lawfare? Statement from the White House. Skadden Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom approached President Trump and his administration and declared the firm's strong commitment to ending the weaponization of the justice system and the legal profession. The president will never stop fighting to deliver on his promise of eradicating partisan lawfare in America and restoring liberty and justice for all. Statement from Skadden executive partner Jeremy London. Skadden is pleased to have achieved a successful agreement with President Trump and his administration. We engaged proactively with the president and his administration, and his team in working together constructively to reach this agreement. The firm looks forward to continuing our productive relationship with President Trump and his admin. We firmly believe that this outcome is in the best interests of our clients, our people, and our firm. And that, my friends, is quite impressive. He has brought these law firms now running to him, understanding that they could be targets of similar action here, and they're getting ahead of it. This is, I think, an example of one of my favorite quotes from The Art of War. And I want to pull that quote up so I don't flub it right now. Those of you who are familiar with The Art of War probably already know that quote. This is not exactly how I remember it. Hold on one second. Hold for processing. Here we go. The internet does not work as well as it used to. Is anyone realizing that? AI works pretty well, but the internet search engines are just not working the way they used to at all. Anyway, this, I'm not sure, is the exact quote I was looking for, but from The Art of War, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. And we have now reached the stage where the enemy is being subdued without fighting. And I think that we should be mighty happy about that, because that is just such a massive departure from where we were in the first term. This, again, was the article I shared from The Atlantic the other day, reprinted in MSN, the pathetic, cowardly collapse of big law. And as I shared on Wednesday, the concern here was that the big firms have kept quiet. One can readily imagine why, he says. Clients of these firms are panicked. Large business interests are at stake, and firms are trying to avoid retaliation. And they are, this author, what was his name here? Paul Rosenwig, however he says it, was very upset that these law firms were capitulating to Donald Trump. He wrote, "It seems clear now that Paul Weiss's selfish act of self-preservation will affect the entire profession. Capitulation to a bully doesn't bring peace. It brings more bullying." Well, Paul Rosenwig, or whatever, I guess you need to add Skadden Arps, Slate, Meager, and Flom to your list of firms that have capitulated, and I would expect we will see many more firms capitulate. It's funny because this is the very heart of the battle. It might seem like nothing, and it's portrayed as Trump trying to take revenge on these law firms for them going after Trump, and then you get into the nonsense about the legitimacy of the legal pursuit of Donald Trump and blah, blah, blah. He committed insurrection and the rest of the nonsense. But their system, the judicial system and the legal system in the United States that has been totally upended and is no longer anything approaching constitutional from the Reconstruction Amendments on, we've seen judicial review, judicial supremacy, and necessary and proper, the Commerce Clause, et cetera. All the ways that the legal system has empowered itself and overturned and overthrown the Constitution, and now they use it just to continue implementing that regime agenda and squashing whoever gets in their way, using the legal system to thwart the legal system and legal recourse. There's a two-tiered system of justice in this country, quite obviously, and now that is being dismantled. And it's not only being dismantled to the detriment of these firms and to the detriment of that old system, it's the use of these firms and the use of that old system against itself, against the regime, in order to accomplish it. And I think that these are very big shots fired and shots landed successfully. And I think we can be very, very happy about this. And, you know, it's not obviously getting the attention of much of the rest of what's going on, much of the rest of what Donald Trump is doing. And those things are all great things, don't get me wrong. But I think this stuff is a lot bigger than we are being led to understand. All right. Let us continue. On the path of these executive orders, this is from the Associated Press yesterday. Trump signs executive order to end collective bargaining at agencies involved with national security. And that is a big one. We are talking about collective bargaining by public sector unions. And if you've listened to this show with any regularity over the last 5 years, you will know that I think public sector unions are an abomination, not for a lot of reasons, but not least of which that they are partially funded by federal government money. So you have federal government employees being represented by the federal government in negotiations against the federal government so that they can all advance their own agenda together while portraying to the public that they're doing so on behalf of these workers who are public servants doing everything they can to help the American people as part of that federal government. And their needs need to be represented somehow to the federal government that employs them. They should be dismantled and removed across the board. There should be no public sector unions. There should be no negotiations with public sector unions. But the method to advancing that cause chosen by the Trump administration is based on national security. before we get into this article, it's also worth mentioning that the Associated Press, there was an article I saw the other day. They are very upset that their limited access has made it so they are unable to be first to market with their reporting about the Trump White House. They're not getting their pictures out as fast as possible. They're not getting their news stories out as fast as possible. So this major organ, this news wire of the global regime's state propaganda media, is now getting thwarted by other news outlets, all on the basis that they would not call the Gulf of America the Gulf of America. So way to go. Way to go, Donald Trump and the narrative manipulation team. That is fantastic stuff. So let's get into, actually now, before we do that, I just saw a comment from Polymath-Anon in the chat, which I think is a really good one, worth sharing. Sure seems like DJT, and plus it's his birthday, so what are you going to do? Sure seems like DJT is dancing around that hidden amendment for these esquires and titles. Yeah, the Titles of Nobility Amendment, as you highlighted not long ago. Yeah, so the Titles of Nobility Amendment, the original 13th Amendment, would make it so that people with titles of nobility could not serve in the federal government, because they wanted it to be the case where people with allegiances and loyalties to the global regime, meaning the British Crown, would not be allowed to serve in the federal government. If that was in place right now, we would have 90% of the Congress, I'm just guessing here, removed immediately. In fact, let's ask the machine and see if the machine knows. What percentage of the Congress are attorneys? As of the 119th Congress, it says approximately a third, 30% of the House, 50% of the Senate has law degrees. However, this represents a significant decline. In the mid-19th century, around 80% were lawyers, which dropped to around 60% in the 1960s. That still seems small to me, but I'll take the machine's word for it. That is, as it notes, considerably lower than it has been. But imagine the Congress without any doctors, lawyers, etc., these titles of nobility. We should not have that in the country, period. We should not have these people who are deemed to be esteemed members of our society because they have passed the qualifications of certain regulatory boards and spent enough time in the indoctrination factories in the universities and postgraduate institutions in order to get rewarded a little certificate to tell us that they are good at their job, when most of them actually aren't good at their job and are instead, rather than being good at their job, are initiating the global regime agenda and implementing it wherever they can. People might think that's crazy. Remember back to 2020. We just talked about the lawyers. Remember what the doctors, all the MDs did back then in terms of pushing the bullshit, very deadly pandemic narrative, in terms of legitimately just murdering people for federal government handouts. Again, people think that that's dramatic. It's not dramatic. Look at the COVID protocols. Nobody forced them to do that. Nobody forced them to put needles in all those arms. Okay. This is one of those things where it's just an entire shift in the mindset that we have been indoctrinated into, brainwashed into over the years, thinking that all of these people are the best of us, when the truth is, no, they aren't. They just have spent a lot longer in school and are getting paid very handsomely to do things that are ultimately, in most cases, I will say, or in many cases, if people are even too triggered by that, antithetical to the good of the American people. So let's get to this end. One last thing. Research the original 13th Amendment just so happened to occur right around the War of 1812. But that's not what the war was fought for. Had nothing to do with it. Totally disconnected. Don't even worry about it. And oh yeah, the Civil War wasn't fought to institute the Reconstruction Amendments and overthrow the Constitution, even though liberal law school professors, the experts, titles of nobility, like George P. Fletcher at Columbia University, argue explicitly that that's exactly why the Civil War was fought. So to think that the War of 1812 would have been fought for similar reasons to overthrow the Constitution is not at all out of bounds. So let's get to this Associated Press article and Donald Trump executive order. President Trump moved Thursday to end collective bargaining with federal labor unions in agencies with national security missions across the federal government, citing authority granted him under a 1978 law. The order, signed without public fanfare and announced late Thursday, appears to touch most of the federal government. Isn't that incredible? Most of the federal government is somehow involved with national security missions. I wonder how it got that way. Oh, it's the global regime, it's uniparty faction here in America that has built the administrative bureaucratic deep state and then used national security as a justification for why all the elements of that administrative bureaucratic deep state must be unaccountable. Oh, you can't know what they're doing. It's a matter of national security. Okay, well, if it's a matter of national security, we can't really leave the operations of this agency, of this department, up to the influence of public sector labor unions. Affected agencies include the Departments of State, Defense, Veterans Affairs, Energy, Health and Human Services, Treasury, Justice, and Commerce, and the part of Homeland Security responsible for border security. Police and firefighters will continue to collectively bargain. Trump said the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 gives him the authority to end collective bargaining with federal unions in these agencies because of their role in safeguarding national security. The American Federation of Government Employees, which represents 820,000 federal and D.C. government workers, said late Thursday that it is preparing immediate legal action and will fight relentlessly to protect our rights, our members, and all working Americans from these unprecedented attacks. President Trump's latest executive order is a disgraceful and retaliatory attack on the rights of hundreds of thousands of patriotic American civil servants, nearly 1/3 of whom are veterans, simply because they are members of a union that stands up to his harmful policies. AFGE National President Everett Kelly said, "Oh, so the union is standing up to the duly elected president of the United States of America, a president who operates with the obvious and overwhelming mandate of the American people. So obvious that it is unquestioned by virtually anyone except for those election rigging conspiracy theorists like that weird lady we saw at the beginning of the show. Why is the public sector union taking it upon themselves to stand up to the duly elected president? Isn't that an odd stance for them to take? Especially when the president is responsible for operating those agencies, choosing what those agencies do. The plenary executive authority over those agencies is the president, and the union is standing up to the president. That doesn't seem like a properly functioning federal government. How did it get this way? Oh, it's like they're operating on behalf of someone other than the American people. And of course, that's exactly what they are doing. Let us continue. Let's take a brief look at the executive order itself, or at least the fact sheet. Let's go to the fact sheet. Here we are. Fact sheet. President Donald J. Trump exempts agencies with national security missions from federal collective bargaining requirements. And we're just going to go through a bit of this. Donald Trump signed an executive order using authority granted by the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 to end collective bargaining with federal unions in the following agencies with national security missions. We're going to skip down because we went through some of those agencies. The CSRA enables hostile federal unions to obstruct agency management. This is dangerous in agencies with national security responsibilities. Agencies cannot modify policies in collective bargaining agreements until they expire. The outgoing Biden administration renegotiated many agencies' CBAs to last through President Trump's second term. So basically making it so that the agencies, even if President Trump wanted to operate them in other ways, wouldn't be allowed to operate in those ways based on the collective bargaining agreements set in place with these public sector unions. Agencies cannot make most contractually permissible changes until after finishing, quote unquote, midterm union bargaining. For example, the FLRA ruled that ICE could not modify cybersecurity policies without giving its union an opportunity to negotiate and then completing midterm bargaining. Well, that is ridiculous. We talk often about the president being disallowed to fire members of these agencies or departments, or to remove the agencies or departments altogether, to strip them of their funding, which we're going to get to in a second. This is about public sector unions restricting the president's ability to operate the agencies of the executive branch in the ways he sees fit. That is a direct attempt to thwart the agenda of the president with the mandate, the only legitimate person in our entire government. Unions use these powers to block the implementation of the VA Accountability Act. The Biden administration had to offer reinstatement and back pay to over 4,000 unionized employees that the VA had removed for poor performance or misconduct. And again, we said all of this is premised on the basis of national security. Now, we were just talking about the ability of the president to control spending in these federal agencies after Congress appropriates the money to be spent. This is from today in the New York Times. Top Senate Republican protests Trump's bid to withhold spending. And that right there is a picture of Susan Collins of Maine, the most consistent Democrat vote in all the Republican Senate, except for Lisa Murkowski. A top Senate Republican on Thursday accused, and what makes her a top Senate Republican? She's been around for a long time. She's on a committee. A top Senate Republican on Thursday accused President Trump of illegally refusing to spend $2.9 billion approved by Congress, teaming with Democrats in an early salvo in the simmering struggle between Congress and the White House over which has the ultimate power over federal spending. Senator Susan Collins, a Republican of Maine and the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, initiated a letter to the White House that was signed by Senator Patty Murray of Washington, the panel's senior Democrat. The letter asserted that the administration had violated the 6-month spending law approved by Congress earlier this month. Ah, darn. I really loved that spending law, too. They pointed to a memo Mr. Trump had sent to Congress on Monday that declared that only a portion of the $12.4 billion designated as emergency funding in the legislation would actually be spent, quote, because I do not concur that the added spending is truly for emergency needs. Wow. So Trump pushed the big spending package, the continuing resolution through so that the government could stay open till September. And now he's saying he's not even going to spend the money, but the government's staying open. So the government shutdown threat is gone, but the money's also not going to be spent in full because stuff that was designated as emergency spending, which I'm not sure about this, but you would think all of it should be if they're going to operate beyond the limits of a budget that's actually passed, spending bills that are actually passed. They're just going to do these forced through continuing resolutions and omnibus packages and must pass legislation like National Defense Authorization Acts. They're going to get all the money allotted through those methods. On what basis should they be allowed to do that? Well, you could see that being necessary on an emergency basis. So how do they respond? They include a bunch of things under emergency spending that are not emergency spending, and now they're being called on it by the Trump administration. And I think that we can be at least somewhat happy about that. The appropriators vigorously contested that assertion, arguing that the law requires the administration to spend all emergency money or none of it, and does not allow the president to decide for himself what money to spend and what not to. So he has to spend all the money or none of the money? That's very strange. Why would the people of the United States ever support something so ridiculous? Well, the answer is they never would support something so ridiculous. How did it get like this? It's almost like they're working for someone else. I think that's going to be the title for today. Working for someone else. Got to remind myself of these things. Otherwise, I'll forget, and I will then waste 10 minutes of valuable productivity scanning through the filing cabinet in my mind to figure out exactly where I left that thing. And then I'll get really, really angry and be like, I can't spend this much time, even though I've already spent that much time. And then I'll just decide on something else that will probably make me equally angry. It's how my mind works. Just as the president does not have a line item veto, he does not have the ability to pick and choose which emergency spending to designate, the letter said. Actually, he does. They noted that the Trump administration's interpretation of federal budget law was at odds with how presidents of both parties had viewed it for 2 decades. It is incumbent on all of us to follow the law as written, not as we would like it to be, says Susan Collins. But, we're going to get there. Skipping down. His decision, this being Trump's, was accompanied by a memorandum from Russell Vought, the head of the Office of Management and Budget, who asserted that the president's action was justified. Mr. Trump and Mr. Vought, who also headed the Office of Management and Budget in Mr. Trump's first administration, argue that the budget law that gives Congress the power to set spending to be executed by the executive branch is unconstitutional. They contend that the president has the power to withhold money even if it was approved by Congress, a proposition likely to be ultimately tested in the courts. And yes, we will see that tested in the courts, and we must see that contested in the courts. We're talking about the Impoundment Act of 1974, if memory serves, and they call this rescission. The president goes through and rescinds certain spending. The Congress's control over the purse allows them to ensure that federal government money they don't want spent is not spent. If they appropriate money to departments or agencies of the executive branch, that doesn't mean that all that money has to be spent, though that is what they are arguing. And the president is now asserting his authority as president to say, actually, these are my departments, these are my agencies, I am the plenary authority under the unitary executive principle, which is the true principle. There's not something else that it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that. He's the plenary authority over the executive branch. He makes all these decisions. All of them are under his purview. The Congress cannot force the creation of an executive branch agency and then force the president to allow that agency to run under his purview, but outside of his control. There are not independent agencies. So we're beginning to see all of the various principles that have to be attacked. Each and every one of those things has to be settled out in the courts because we need the imprimatur of the constitutional legitimacy of each one of these things, even though it only matters what the people actually believe at the end of the day. But having these fights in public, bringing these fights out to the public is how you get the public mandate behind each and every one of those principles. And that's the process we're involved in now. And again, I would turn everybody's attention to the Path to Liberty podcast by the 10th Amendment Center. I think that is a wonderful place to learn about these principles in depth. Okay, I'll make my case and give my conclusions, but they are an invaluable source for me and a wonderful jumping off point to look much deeper into all these issues. So Patty Murray, the Democrat, said this on the floor of the Senate. Right now, we have a couple of billionaires running our country straight into the ground who seem to have skipped American history because President Trump and Elon Musk don't seem to care much about our Constitution. Well, Patty Murray doesn't know what our Constitution says, nor its original intent, obviously, and essentially just believes that all the body of law and court precedent that have burst forth from those Reconstruction amendments that overthrew the Constitution are the Constitution. Judicial precedent is not the Constitution. Statutory law, regulations, norms, and standards, none of those are the Constitution. She pointed to the provision that, quote, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. And she says their lack of interest in that section of the Constitution doesn't make it any less real. Well, it may not make it any less real, but that sentence does not in any way apply to the president's ability to stop money being spent that Congress has appropriated on behalf of the people. The president can stop the money being spent. This just says he can't draw money from the Treasury without the Congress's approval. It doesn't say the Congress gets to approve of that spending and thereby force the president to oversee the spending. The fight over who has final authority over funding will hang over the coming debate for 2026 spending as the House and Senate assemble allocations for federal agencies, and we shall see. Skipping down to the end here, Ms. Collins said she and Ms. Murray were relying on legal opinions and findings by the Congressional Research Service, that they were in the right, and said they hoped to persuade Mr. Vaught to reconsider his view. The best outcome would be if OMB took a second look at this. Does that sound like they have confidence in the Constitution and the interpretation of the original intent of that Constitution, ultimately siding with their position? That sounds like zero confidence whatsoever. That's pathetic. They basically got down to the end and said, please, Russ Vaught, please won't you decide to completely change your principles in violation of what the president deems best for the country? Oh, it's so preposterous. Real Purdy in the chat, $20. Thank you very much. Chris, thanks for all your hard work and critical thinking. The value you bring to my mind and this community is appreciated. And thank you very much. I really do appreciate that stuff. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, because the truth is I get nothing but blowback. Not nothing but blowback. I don't mean to be dramatic here. And discount the wealth of support I also get. But after being screamed at online for 5 straight years, it eventually gets to wear you down a little bit. And it's not that it's worn down my motivation or my commitment to the cause or any of that. It's just that eventually you're like, okay, well, I'm going to maybe tune out on some of this and maybe switch my subject matter a little bit and work in a different area for a little while. And I actually, Starborn posted a Rumble rant as I was wrapping up the show the other day that I did not get to and was not able to address. And I'm not sure that I will be able to find that Rumble rant. It's generally impossible to find the text of those rants. If they're not saved, then I never end up saving them. But she was asking what I alluded to in terms of changing up the process of this show and the rest of it over in kind of the near future. I am going to keep doing this, obviously, through Liberation Day. If you have, which is next Wednesday, if you have listened to the show consistently over at least the last year or so, I've said many times over the last 4 years since the fake election and since Joe Biden's fake inauguration, but ultimately since Donald Trump's discussions of the 250th birthday of America, that celebration to begin around the end of May, maybe to go so far as his birthday, Flag Day, the beginning of the Confederate Army, actually 250 years ago in 1775. Sticking around through that point, seeing that as the end of the process. I used to talk about that in the lead up to the obviously fake 2024 election, that I didn't think the process was going to be ending by any stretch of the imagination with November 5th, which was, I guess, our original Liberation Day, and that it would actually carry through May of 2025. So I'm going to be sticking around in this current form, I think, for that long, sometime in the period between Liberation Day on Wednesday and the middle of June of this year. And then at some point, I'm going to scale back on doing live shows and podcasts, which isn't to say there won't be any of them, but they're just not going to be with this regularity, because I am trying to write books that I think, or at least one book in particular that I think is going to help not only me, but help my current audience and any potential audience understand some of the big picture concepts that I have laid out in great depth over the last few years. But I understand that if you haven't heard those episodes, or you haven't been listening to this show for that long, talking about those concepts in shorthand, understanding that they are large concepts to unpack, is, I understand, to be a barrier between this show and growing a larger audience with my approach to this show, which is the approach I'm going to continue to take. It's the only approach that I can take. So I want to be able to lay those concepts, which all kind of revolve around the epistemology. It all weaves through that in one way or another. And I think that will provide a basis for people to be able to really understand what it is I'm saying, and thinking about those foundational concepts of this show. And it's also the sort of thing, having a book out there that will allow me to be a guest on other shows, to be able to talk about that thought process and grow the show that way. And so I understand these to be barriers to breaking through that next level. And I think that this is going to allow me to approach it in a way that doesn't cater to trying to create viral content, to getting into the world of influencers, to trying to focus all my time on normie news, which I don't think is worth my time. I don't think it's worth your time. And so it would be some sort of hiatus or sabbatical where I kind of reconceive the approach to the show, write more frequently on Substack, and then devote my time each day waking up, rather than my first thought being, what are the headlines? What are the controversies? What do we need to understand today? How do we apply that to the big picture? How do I apply that to my own personal understanding? Just simply waking up and being, and approaching my day's mindset with, how do I organize these thoughts and make myself able to produce them in written form so I can complete this series of tasks that is going to improve my audience experience ultimately and enable me to reach that next level. And I think it would also just be a nice kind of culmination of this 5-year plus phase of my work to be able to put something in that hard form that people can own and that will be kind of a lasting body of knowledge that I've produced over these last 5 years. So I hope that people are supportive in that process. And I understand that maybe some people are not going to like that as much, just because that'll mean that I don't have the regular podcasts. I know that a lot of people are real hooked into that daily news cycle. I remember when I was like that, okay? I'm sympathetic to that concern. I really am. I remember when I was like that. I remember each day how I was so stressed out. I was just waiting for Steve Bannon to come on War Room. And when War Room ended, I was waiting for X22 to come on so that I could get all that stuff in and then begin to analyze all the conversations that were happening so that I could do the podcast the next day. I have moved past that. And I think a lot of my audience has moved past that. And for people who haven't moved past that desperate feeling where you need to know what's going on every day, I would encourage you to focus some time on getting past that and letting some of that go, because the day-to-day news cycle is mostly bullshit. And, you know, people are like, well, you're just saying that because you think everything's fake. No. First off, I think most of the stuff is fake. And I think most of it's bullshit because I have spent somewhere between 10 to 15 hours per day, nearly every day, for over 5 years paying attention to it. Okay? That is the conclusion I have reached from all that work. And I point out how a lot of it's bullshit. And I point out that even if you aren't prepared to wrestle with it all being bullshit, I can at least, I believe, prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is not the stuff that is primarily worth your time, okay? And that the central narrative, the mainstream media, the alternative mainstream media, the influencer segment of the mainstream media, and the normie podcasters out there are distracting you from the most important stuff, okay? The most important stuff is to understand big picture where all of this is going and then bring in the economic stuff so that you can make the decisions that are going to keep you mentally healthy and understanding what is happening in the big picture so that you can be a rock for yourself, your family, and your community, and you can make wise financial decisions so that when the secondary flush, the first one happened in 2020, the secondary flush of this great reset and the economic adjustment, which may be next Wednesday, I don't know, is not going to destroy you the way many people were destroyed in 2020. Okay? Some people are still going to fall victim to that. And I imagine that some very wealthy people are still going to fall victim to that. But I would be remiss to allow that to be my audience. Okay? And so that is what I'm working for. I don't give a shit if the normie news passes me by. All right? And I think that most people need to get to that page because the soap opera is just gonna keep playing out. All right. Imagine just for a second, and this is all a big tangent I did not anticipate going on. But imagine General Hospital. Let's just take a soap opera. Many of them have been running for many, many years. Okay. Plays 5 days a week for 60 years. Let's say you used to be a big fan of it 10 years ago. You used to watch it all the time. Couldn't imagine missing an episode. And then all of a sudden, life takes you in a different direction. You end up missing the show for a year, 5 years, or 10 years. And you come back to it. And you start watching it again. And you're like, well, that's the same. Most of the characters are the same. Most of the story's the same. Yeah, the language they use, the dialogue's different. The setting is different. Maybe one of the actors has aged. Maybe that person's love interest has been swapped out. But you're seeing the same stories over and over and over and over and over again. Okay? Once you understand the meaning of the stories, what they want us to believe, and then how we should react to those stories, how to remove ourselves from the emotionality and the rage bait, take only the meaning, which is an inversion of the meaning they want us to believe. Why do we need to watch the reruns over and over again? Why do I need to know what the next version of the story is? Right? We already know the story. We already know the purpose. Check out from that stuff and focus on the things that are actually going to take care of you, your family, and your community in your own life. And that's all I'm saying. So in the interest of those principles, I think at some point in the next couple of months, I will be taking some sort of hiatus, stepping away a little bit, maybe refocusing on doing interviews, expanding the subject matter, whatever it is. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still going to be writing on Substack. At the end of all this, I hope to have a very, very good book for everybody. Okay. And, some people I understand are in it for the podcast and will not want to support the Substack or whatever it is I'm doing in that meantime. And I totally understand that. And this is just a leap of faith I have to take with me making the proper decisions in my life. And so I'm trying to make a very rational decision in doing that in terms of the time frame, and then just proceeding forward as best I can to complete some tasks that I know must be completed and wear on me when I do not have the focus and attention to devote to those tasks. So I think that is about as well as I can describe all of that. All right. John Drake in the chat says, $10 Rumble Rant. APL appreciates you. That's A. And B, we appreciate you. Thanks for being the tip of the spear, cutting through the bullshit. We are with you. Thank you very much, my friend. And you know who else thanks you? This little lady. I had to quickly hit the switch to turn on the ceiling fan. It's getting a little warm in my room here. And also we have Beachbound 904 $20. We appreciate and support wherever that may be. We appreciate and support you wherever that may be. You are invaluable and one of the two must watch at this point. BB is my other. Much gratitude. Thank you very much, Beachbound. Burning Bright is who she is referring to, of course. And he is my co-host, for those who don't know, on Badlands Story Hour. He is also, like me, the person who takes a narrative-only approach to what we are being fed. I would also say that my good pal, John Harold, is much must-watch as well, particularly with his work on the Daily Herald. And I would recommend everybody in Badlands, which is why I so often wear our Badlands merch, even though this particular show is not a Badlands show. Karamaga, $10, says, Starborn, $5 in the chat, says, thank you, loved the answer to my question, wishing you an amazing writing process. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so let us get back to the subjects primarily of interest here, which are not my personal life and decisions. Okay, Donald Trump yesterday, while we are, darn it, I need one more. You know what? Let's just, no, we're going to pull this up. I forgot to provide myself a link to one of the executive actions from yesterday. So we're going to get back to the executive actions. Here we are. Okay. So Donald Trump yesterday did an executive action on cleaning up Washington, D.C., something he has promised to do for quite a long time. And, we've talked a bunch about Washington, D.C. being the federal city, the home of the foreign occupation that runs this overthrown Constitution in whatever way they see fit. They operate the court system there in the District of Columbia, and they have created their own legal system, their own judiciary, and they have the deep state, the bureaucratic administrative state, all of that contained within the federal city, Washington, D.C. I don't think it's been renamed the District of America yet. I would love to believe that. I hope it is. Maybe one day we'll see that. But as we have said many times, the District of Columbia is not part of any state, and they are not subject, therefore, to any state laws. They are only subject to the laws of the federal government, which they can change whenever they want. So Trump releases this fact sheet yesterday. Trump works to make our nation's capital safe and beautiful. The executive order establishes a task force, officially known as the D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force, that will be comprised of members of key government agencies. And you want it safe, you want it beautiful. It's a big, beautiful federal city. The task force is directed to surge law enforcement officers in public areas and strictly enforce quality of life laws in public areas like drug use, unpermitted demonstrations, vandalism, and public intoxication. So, clean up the homeless, clean up the crime. Maximize immigration enforcement to apprehend and deport dangerous illegal aliens, including monitoring DC's cooperation with federal immigration authorities. So get rid of the illegal aliens. Help DC's Forensic Crime Laboratory get accreditation. Okay. Provide assistance to the DC Police Department in recruiting and retaining officers and boosting capabilities. Keep dangerous criminals off the streets by strengthening pretrial detention policies. Expedite concealed carry licenses for law-abiding citizens. Whoa. That could spark a direct challenge to all of the ways that the Second Amendment is improperly interpreted in our courts, and I do look forward to that. Crack down on fare evasion and other crimes on the DC metro system. It will also create a program to beautify Washington, D.C., restoring and beautifying federal buildings, monuments, statues, memorials, parks, and roadways, removing graffiti from commonly visited areas, and ensuring the cleanliness of public spaces and parks. And all of that directly addresses some of what we saw in the Summer of Love in 2020. And we might just get to that Summer of Love at some point in this episode, depending on how quickly we move through all of this. So, I had a conversation with the machine a little earlier with ChatGPT. I've been using ChatGPT more often recently, and I think it's just better, to be honest. And I know that we're not allowed to say that because ChatGPT was supposed to be open source and now it's closed source, according to Elon, and we hate Sam Altman and all those things. Okay. I can also ask ChatGPT certain questions, and within a couple of prompts, get it to give much smarter and more thorough answers than I can get from the same process on Perplexity, which I've been using for months now. And I can get it to take on a fully based persona where it is divulging information to me about the corruption in our government. And I think it's been fantastic in that stuff. So with all AI, you got to check its work. Okay. You can't depend on the things it says. You got to note that going in. But I think it's been really good. So let's share this ChatGPT thread from earlier today. I asked, what power does the president have to enforce the law in the federal city? And it, of course, notes that the federal city is Washington, D.C. We don't need to get through the constitutional foundation. I get it. Control over federal agencies. The president directs the DOJ, including U.S. Marshals, the FBI, and federal prosecutors in D.C., who are, of course, under the DOJ. The president can also mobilize federal law enforcement during protests, riots, or security threats. The president can deploy federal military or National Guard troops in D.C. more freely than in the states, since D.C. has no governor. The D.C. National Guard reports directly to the Secretary of Defense and the president, unlike state guards, which report to the governors. And all this is relevant in the post-January 6th narratives, as we saw, and as we will, I'm sure, see again. But that is some level of control in the federal city by the president to deal with crime, and his powers are expanded under national emergency. And we've been under national emergency for a long time. And I would suggest that any of you who are fans of John Harold's Devolution series and the work that we have done on the Devolution Power Hour over the last, 2.5 years, would be all over all this stuff. And if you're not into that stuff, I really, really suggest you take the time and read the Devolution series, or listen to the narration, or even just watch the summaries or John's recaps or something. You know, a lot of people think that that's somehow not legitimate or couldn't be happening or not worth knowing because there was a series of various operations, some of them, and other times just people being angry that John was making it so people wouldn't vote, some nonsense. There's a lot in there. It's important stuff to know, in my opinion. It is well worth your time. And a lot of the people, one thing you can know pretty much for certain is that the people who are speaking out against devolution have actually never read it. I have not come across one person the entire time who's angry about devolution and actually read the whole thing. Not one. And I've had plenty of these come my way. Trump on Truth Social this morning, commenting about that executive order. Washington, D.C. must become clean and safe again. We need our great police back on the street with no excuses from the mayor or anyone else. The House should take up the D.C. funding, quote unquote, fix that the Senate has passed and get it done immediately. We need to clean up our once beautiful capital city and make it beautiful again. We will be tough on crime like never before. I will work with the mayor on this, and if it does not happen, we'll have no choice but to do it myself. Washington, D.C. will be better, safer, and more beautiful than ever before. And we just heard the means by which he is able to do it himself. At some point, one would hope this would count for and would target the criminals within the federal city. A couple more Rumble rants coming in. Jay Gonzalez, 1123, $5. Chris Paul, outside of Donald J. Trump, you're one of the few people I have yet had the chance to meet and shake their hand. I will walk through the depths of hell by your side. Thank you for sharing your mind. Well, that is very kind. And are you saying that you have gotten to shake the hand of Donald Trump? Or are you saying that you want to meet both Trump and I and shake our hands? Well, if you're at a GART event, you can do that. In one way or another, I imagine all our paths might cross one day. Polymath Anon, $5. Weird, I got an email from APL saying she's forming a congressional subcommittee to look into my 50th birthday. So random. Well, I hope she does, because what a birthday it is. Happy birthday once again. And shout out to Una Panuna Banca herself, Anna Paulina Luna. Someone told me the other day that I actually need to play the full original song. I guess it's called Una Paloma Blanca, One White Dove. To me, that sounds like I will take a Paloma, the drink, with silver tequila, Blanco, rather than a Añejo or Reposado. I'm a fan of the Paloma. The highfalutin Palomas, where they use fresh squeezed grapefruit juice and soda with your tequila, or the more basic Paloma, which is tequila and squirt the grapefruit soda. That, I believe, might be the old school way to do it, and I do like that way. Dennis, $10 in the chat. I just wanted to buy you one beer. One. Does this still cover it after inflation? Yes. And if I go to the grocery store, I can buy a 6-pack with that. So thank you, buddy. All right, let's continue. Where are we? Where are we indeed? We've gone through the presidential powers. Okay, so let's get to some of the big news from yesterday. We talked about Randy Fine and his election, his fake election that will be held next week. It sounds like the Republican Party of Florida has said, we're going to let this one go to the Democrats. Old Ron DeSantis is firing up the rigged and stolen election apparatus down in Florida and allowing potentially a Democrat win or a close enough race that we are now worried about the House majority. And due to our concerns about the House majority, Elise Stefanik is going to be called back from her nomination to the currently collapsing and soon to be non-existent United Nations. We should not have a United Nations at all. We should have no multilateral agreements at any time ever. So, with that in mind, we certainly do not need a United Nations. We do not need a United Nations ambassador, is what I meant to say, actually. Let us go briefly. We'll get the story here and then more of that in just a moment. This is the New York Times. Trump asks Stefanik to withdraw bid to be UN ambassador. President Trump on Thursday said he asked Representative Elise Stefanik to stay in Congress rather than serve as ambassador to the United Nations amid concern about the minuscule voting margin that Republicans hold in the House. And I think that they commented, if I recall, yes, her nomination had been expected to move ahead after April 1st, when two Trump-endorsed Republicans were expected to fill a pair of House seats in Florida that were left vacant after the departures of former Representatives Mike Waltz and Matt Gaetz of Florida. Both had resigned after Mr. Trump selected them to serve in his administration, though Mr. Gaetz later withdrew from consideration as Attorney General amid resistance on Capitol Hill. But there has been growing concern among Republicans in recent days about the special election to replace Mr. Waltz, the embattled national security advisor who has drawn criticism for his involvement in a leaked Signal chat about a military spike on Yemen in which he included a journalist. What was supposed to be a safe seat has become a competitive race. So that is the official story within the central narrative about why Donald Trump needs to make this move. And I'm not saying that Trump is disputing the official story in the central narrative, though we will. Here is Trump's commentary yesterday on Truth Social, his announcement of Stefanik being, her nomination being withdrawn. Yes, it was reported by other news sites. Oh, they got the scoop even before Donald Trump put it up on Truth Social. Wowie zowie.
Wow. Wowie, wow, wow, wow.
Wow, indeed. As we advance our America First agenda, it is essential that we maintain every Republican seat in Congress. We must be unified to accomplish our mission, and Elise Stefanik has been a vital part of our efforts from the very beginning. I have asked Elise, as one of my biggest allies, to remain in Congress, to help me deliver historic tax cuts, great jobs, record economic growth, a secure border, energy dominance, peace through strength, and much more. So we can make America great again. With a very tight majority, I don't want to take a chance on anyone else running for Elise's seat. The people love Elise, and with her, we have nothing to worry about come Election Day. There are others that can do a good job at the United Nations. Therefore, Elise will stay in Congress, rejoin the House leadership team, and continue to fight for our amazing American people. Speaker Johnson is thrilled. I look forward to the day when Elise is able to join my administration in the future. She is absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Elise. So, Donald Trump just said there is no way that the Republican National Committee could pull off losing the Republican seat in Elise Stefanik's district. With her, there's nothing to worry about. Ron DeSantis couldn't even stop that from becoming a Republican seat again because Elise Stefanik is there. And of course, why would the establishment want to remove Elise Stefanik? Donald Trump says she's one of his greatest allies. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's true. She wasn't before. There's a lot of reason to believe that she's one of those people like Kevin McCarthy, who's called a great ally, but is really a servant of the establishment. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on Elise Stefanik. We're just playing a very complicated game, and we have to at least consider that that's the case. Now, why might that be the case? Why might there be something else going on? Well, again, UN ambassador. We don't need a UN. We shouldn't have a UN. Donald Trump's foreign policy agenda suggests that the UN has no role, that multilateral agreements should have no role, that being part of a multilateral organization should not entitle us to make decisions for other countries around the world and then enforce those decisions with UN peacekeeping missions, the UN military force, or with the American military. Okay? So having a UN makes no sense. Having a UN ambassador makes no sense. We turn to the Congress. Are they going to get Donald Trump's agenda passed? We talked about that the other day. It was going to be held up in the Senate. We talked about it earlier today, actually. It's going to be held up in the Senate till the fall, maybe after the government shutdown, the continuing resolution expires. We're not going to get Mike Johnson's package approved of. Ultimately, they said, maybe we can work with that. And then eventually they thought more about Mike Johnson's package and were like, nah, it's too big. It's too beautiful. Can't do it. So that's not going to get done till the fall. What do we need a legislative majority for? Now, I had this discussion with my good pal Can Khan this morning on Badlands Daily, and he believes we do need a legislative majority. He doesn't want to see the Congress have any power under Democrat hands to thwart the Trump agenda, to launch investigations or whatever else. I personally don't care at all. I don't care about Congress's investigations. I don't care about their dumb televised hearings. I don't care about any of it. I do not want the federal government to create any new laws or approve of any new spending. And I've been saying this now for 2 years. So the position has remained entirely consistent. And all we have seen them do in that entire time is pass more continuing resolutions, which is just providing narrative cover that the money, the global regime will launder to continue implementing the agenda throughout the deep state, the bureaucratic administrative state, and then in the states that those agencies and departments, the efforts in those states that they are funding continues. That's all they've done besides hold ridiculous televised hearings. And the Republican hearings during the fake and illegitimate Biden administration were ridiculous. They were all terrible. Those people did nothing. And they're not doing anything now either. Okay? If it's part of the TV show and we're all supposed to just applaud and eat popcorn, then fine. But otherwise, they're not doing anything. So I don't care if the Democrats go in and do the same thing. And we have them leading the hearings and them with subpoena power and blah, blah, blah. It's also stupid. We don't need a Congress. We don't need legislation. Donald Trump's agenda is dismantling the federal government. It's not based on anything the legislative branch is going to do. It's not based on anything the judiciary is going to do. The Congress and the Senate have no role. Sorry, they have no role. Their role is to pass legislation and approve of spending. And that's it. And we don't need that. So they have no role. The judiciary is to weigh in on whether or not what the other branches are doing comports with the Constitution, and then potentially direct other courts. But we can see that they don't take that responsibility seriously. They granted themselves additional powers because they thought there wasn't enough. And so now we have them operating well outside their constitutional role, which destroys their legitimacy. Not that they really have it with Ketanji Brown Jackson, nominated by a fake and illegitimate president, on there in the first place. Okay? So all these people are committing treason. We don't need them to pass laws for us and tell us that our laws are okay. They're committing treason by holding office illegitimately, knowingly doing so. All right? So we don't need anything from any of them. We certainly don't need a congressional majority. So for those two reasons, because we don't need a UN, we don't need a Congress, I would suggest to you that all of this is a smokescreen. And what's it a smokescreen for? Donald Trump nominating away his own majority, which I said he was doing 3 months ago. When he started to name the fantasy team, 4 months ago now, when he started to name the fantasy team back in November, I was like, yeah, he's just nominating away the Republican majority because the Congress and the Senate don't do anything, can't do anything, and we don't want them to do anything. Is that what we're seeing now? I would submit for your consideration that it is exactly what we see now. But I know. The TV says that we really need that vote in Congress, and that's what it's got to be. My stuff is a conspiracy theory. The thing that TV says is right this time. They're not trying to mislead you, and they can't be because Trump is saying it too, as if Trump was going to come out and say the thing that I'm saying. All right. Another Rumble rant. Thank you all very much for your support today, by the way. Unathiok. I hope I'm saying that right. $5. As I've said previously, I love your reasonable way of communicating issues. You're one of my favorites. Well, thank you. I assume that because of that, you have great taste in the rest of them, but I am really only willing to provide you that compliment based on myself. I'm kidding. All right, let us continue. More domestic issues. Man, maybe I'll skip over the some of the boring Mike Waltz stuff, the Signal stuff. Maybe I won't. Maybe we'll just blaze through it. We're going to blaze through some of these things because I want to talk about some geopolitical stuff today as well. This is CNN from this morning. What we know about the Tufts University PhD student detained by federal agents. Oh, come on, man. Always do that. I grab the, I make it archive the link. I grab the archive link, and then for whatever reason, I copy and paste the original link into my notes, and the original link is behind the paywall, so then we have to go to the archive link. That is where we are now. It's CNN. What we know, I already did that headline. Whatever. They've updated the story since last night when they originally put it up. As the sun began to set Tuesday over Somerville, Massachusetts, Turkish national Rumeysa Ozturk was on her way to meet friends at an iftar dinner where they would break their Ramadan fast. Oh, wow. The details. It's going to be so dramatic. They're making sure that we know this person is from another culture, a protected class, no less. But she would never make it to the gathering, according to her attorney. Instead, the 30-year-old was arrested and physically restrained by immigration officers near her apartment close to Tufts University's, there we go, Somerville campus, where she was a PhD student. Lawyer Masha Kanbabai told CNN 6 plainclothes officers surrounded Ozturk as she walked alone. Neighborhood surveillance video appears to show. The officers did not show their badges until she was restrained, the video shows. Ozturk is one of several foreign nationals affiliated with prestigious American universities to be arrested for purported activities related to terrorist organizations amid the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. They include Mahmoud Khalil, a prominent Palestinian activist taken into custody this month outside his Columbia University apartment. Ozturk, quote, engaged in activities in support of Hamas, a Department of Homeland Security spokesperson said Wednesday in a statement without specifying what those alleged activities were. Okay, so masked men round up a leftist activist that they are putting under the cover of being a university student. Now, let's go to Marco Rubio first, and then we'll come back to the ultimate, what I believe is the takeaway here. Let's go to Marco Rubio. A couple statements from Rubio about this.
Secretary, a Turkish student in Boston was detained and handcuffed on the street by plainclothes agents. A year ago, she wrote an opinion piece about the Gaza war. Could you help us understand what the specific action she took led to her visa being revoked?
Yeah.
And what was your State Department's role in that process?
We revoked her visa. It's an F1 visa, I believe. We revoked it, and here's why. And I'll say it again. I said it everywhere. Let me be abundantly clear, okay? If you go apply for a visa right now, anywhere in the world, let me just send this message out. If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa. And once you've lost your visa, you're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country.
Well, that's pretty simple. Now, we don't want the federal government going after peaceful protesters because, of course, the right to assemble and submit our grievances to the government is part of the First Amendment. So that part's no good. But if we have foreigners coming here to engage in protest activities and activist work on behalf of the global regime here in the United States in efforts to further their color revolutions, well, then we should have the right to cancel their visas, or we should have the ability, I should say, not the right, to cancel their visas and have them removed. That seems perfectly rational. Let's hear from Rubio once again.
The action is simple. Your visas expire, your visas revoked, you have to leave.
So I know this is a little difficult to hear. The reporters pushing back and saying 6 masked figures came up and did this.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, our agents, I mean, I'm not, that's in DHS or ICE, so I don't know what their practices are, but our agents have had to protect their identity because they found themselves targeted for violence, targeted for operations against them. I would say most of these protesters are wearing masks too.
Okay, so we have masked protesters, masked agents rounding people up. And let's actually do one more, and then we'll get to what I believe is the punchline on all this. This is Pam Bondi yesterday on Laura Ingraham. Here we are.
What's happening with this Las Vegas Tesla criminal who he was arrested and now federal charges have been filed against him? This was something that was needed given everything we're seeing happening to those dealerships and those cars across the country.
That was remarkable police work, working with the state police, our FBI. They have been going nonstop on this case. This guy is in custody. Laura, he is facing 5-year minimum mandatory to 20 years in prison. And this was great police work. This guy thought he got away with it. So these people better look out. They better cut it out, because we are coming after you. And at my direction, there will be no negotiating on these people.
No plea
deals. We are seeking 20 years in prison. They are setting off bombs, the huge fires. Look what you're seeing. Huge, massive fires in residential neighborhoods.
Someone's going to get killed.
Charging stations. Someone is going to get killed. A citizen is going to get killed. And these people, we are not doing any plea negotiations on them. So they better cut it out.
We have some information about the groups that he belonged to, this individual. Let's watch.
But a preliminary assessment of the suspect's social media activity indicates some very loose but self-proclaimed ties to the Communist Party USA social media group, as well as social media groups called Revolutionary Communist International, Hidden Palestine, Palestine Action, and a variety of other social media groups.
I mean, this is like a cliche of every left-wing communist, socialist, Hamas.
Right. We are looking at, in all of these cases, every aspect, we are not going to leave a stone unturned.
So the messages are going out.
So they are actually going to begin prosecuting violent domestic terrorists. This is a clear, fully acknowledged in public, not the operation part, but it is an operation. Everybody in the general public knows about Tesla dealerships being gone after, the king of Tesla cars. This is something that has gone so viral that the only way not to know this is happening in the country is to be the sort of person who doesn't pay attention to any of the news. And that's totally fine. But I would suggest that anyone who is even a regular on any form of social media would probably see enough news to know that there are protests against Elon Musk, against Tesla cars and Tesla dealerships and the rest of it. So what we're seeing is actually violent domestic terrorism. And in 2020, we were told that the violent domestic terrorism was actually peaceful protests, and we didn't see too much of it prosecuted. I would suggest that this is of a part with the Rubio stuff, not only because the political leanings and affiliations and funding sources, et cetera, of these two stories converge at that point, but also you might remember back in the summer of love in 2020 in Portland, as the federal courthouses were under attack and Antifa was running rampant, we had headlines like this one from NPR. Federal officers use unmarked vehicles to grab people in Portland, DHS confirms. And so, of course, we had all of the incredible info op pictures. What an extraordinary event all of that was. What a incredible television series all of that was throughout 2020. I just had this Daily Mail article open a second ago, and the pictures were rather absurd. Here, look at this. Let's just scroll through so we can all get the memory of the peaceful protests of the summer of love. And if you want to look at these later, Portland mayor demands Trump remove his personal army of federal agents after 50th night of unrest. As video shows, blah, 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 unmarked van. Okay? Daily Mail headlines are like 2 paragraphs long. Look at these pictures. I talked with CanCon this morning about a principle that is often ignored to our detriment while we are busy calling things real that are not fully real. The fact that we often see astroturfed efforts like protests, particularly all that stuff in BLM, it's funded, it's organized from the top, from regime assets and organizations, sometimes controlled by people like Barack Obama, often funded by George Soros and other quote unquote philanthropists. It's just the Color Revolution playbook and all the NGOs and various bodies that help them with color revolutions. That's the astroturfed element. And then because the media element of that color revolution campaign is so effective, or less effective now, but it's still effective to some degree, organic elements add themselves onto those astroturfed elements. So people will actually have an emotional reaction to what they're seeing on TV. They will be encouraged by people on social media to go involve themselves in those protests. That is just effective That is just a measure of the effectiveness of the AstroTurf operation, that people go get themselves involved. But that doesn't change what the underlying motivation is. The underlying motivation for all of those protest movements is the AstroTurf element, okay? It's the well-funded, well-organized part of the color revolution. So adding organic elements onto the AstroTurf PSYOP does not make all that real. It makes the people involved organically, it makes them part of the fakery. By accident, unwittingly, they have hoodwinked themselves into participating in a PSYOP, but that doesn't take away the event's status as a PSYOP. It's still a PSYOP. And so, we know that the media is part of the selling of these, quote unquote, organic protests. The funding and the organizing and the media effort are all of a part. They're the same thing. Okay. So the pictures of these events that are produced in the aftermath and then recycled through the media are just part of the same PSYOP. So thinking about that, let's look at the PSYOP. Look at these pictures. Oh, they're so well shot. These people, they look angry, right? The masked soldiers with all this special military gear in their camo, and their big assault weapons. And then you have this poor protester showing Breonna Taylor, who is herself the subject of a PSYOP, this very soy-based communist here with the mask, another person of color or not, that looks like a white hand, another mask. You can continue on down, more military. These are the bad guys, boarded up stores throughout the city. They're carrying off these peaceful protesters. All the graffiti left behind, these people walking through and viewing it as though it's a museum. That's what that is. That's a picture of people strolling through a museum, except it's a cityscape, and all the artwork is done by degenerate communists. More masks. All cops are bastards here. More masks. Antifa communists. Black Lives Matter. All their little bicycles. Everybody's got a mask. This dude looks like he was just dropped in from a Halloween party playing a terrorist. Ridiculous. BLM, Antifa, all these people. Dykes against racism. Oh, for sure. You're crushing it, Dyke. I can call her a dyke because she calls herself a dyke. It's not a slur when I'm saying what she says. It's still a slur when you say it because you're a straight white man. Black Lives Matter, blah, blah, blah. Military, they're the bad guys. You get the picture. Oh, it's so crazy. How did we do it? How did we do it? How do we all get sucked in to such degenerate nonsense for so very long? Oh, it's sad. You know what we should do? We should take a little break here to support our free speech platform here, Rumble. When Rumble first started in 2013, they built a platform for the small creator. They didn't censor or have biases. They were fair and treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversation or censor opinions on COVID, but they did. Facebook admitted that they fell to pressure from the Biden and Harris administration. It's got to be noted that censorship was carried out initially by the deep state, the bureaucratic administrative state under the Trump administration in 2020. I got banned in 2020. That wasn't the fake President Joe Biden doing that. But Rumble did not censor free speech. They held the line. They are attacked daily for giving us a voice to talk to you. They are attacked in corporate media. They are attacked by governments like France. They are attacked from brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate media is fighting to remove speech. Rumble is fighting to keep it. Rumble won't survive with brand advertisers because they don't get much of it. Watching this show on Rumble is the most they can ask. But if you really believe in the fight and you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human right to free speech. Rumble is offering $10 off with the promo code STUDIO when you purchase an annual subscription. Go to rumble.com/premium and use promo code STUDIO for $10 off. And thank you for your support of this show and for the Rumble platform in general that has made it possible to host my show for so very long. And if Substack wants to start advertising, hey, Substack, go right ahead, and I will give you props in absolutely the same way, because Substack, I've had no problems with them in the last 5 years now of doing that. And after processing, I might be able to find a particularly interesting notification that I got yesterday. I'm not sure I'll be able to locate it, because you know how notifications are. In 24 hours, they're pretty well buried. But maybe I can scroll quickly and not hold too long for this amount of processing. It was quite a surprise yesterday. I'm not sure that it means a whole hell of a lot, but I'll take it if I can find it. And if I can't find it in about another 10 seconds, I'm going to just spill the beans on this. And I don't believe that I will find it. But I found out yesterday that my Substack is number 12 in the philosophy category, right after Pam Anderson, 8 slots down from Slavoj Zizek, who's like, I guess, a Marxist or a leftist or something, but like a world-renowned philosopher, and ahead of people like James Lindsay and Coleman Hughes, who are both normies who pretend to be edgy and right of center, but are really just statists and leftists and boring as hell as far as I'm concerned. And also Nick Land's publisher, Imperium Press, who I think are awesome, by the way. If anybody knows Imperium Press, I would love for them to publish my eventual book, and I think it would fit in their oeuvre. So very cool. I guess the philosophy category is probably not too populated with people who talk about political philosophy, and therefore not as mainstream as you might find if you went to Substack's news category, or I don't know if they have a politics category, but it's a smaller pond to swim around in, which is why I'm not sure it means all that much. But being number 12 around those names is pretty cool. So whatever. I think that in the future I will be focusing more toward philosophy material than politics material. Oh man, Maggie D8 just said, bro, you might be right under Pam Anderson, but you have a far superior audience. Thank you. And I would agree with you. And also saying right under Pam Anderson is, it's not a, that's what she said, I guess, but I feel like it's along those lines. Anyway. All right. And when you say Pam Anderson, it makes me think of this.
Fake.
I'm stunned. I'm shocked. How many times did you do this?
All the time.
Pam Anderson. Fake. Maybe she's not. I'm sure she's a lovely person. I've never met her. Okay. Where were we? All right. Oh, man. This one, I don't think I'm going to spend much time on this, but I had to point it out. It's just too amazing with what we talked about on Wednesday in terms of the Signal chat and the rest of it. And for free subscribers, people who don't subscribe to Substack, that podcast will stream on Sunday afternoon on YouTube and Rumble. So if you missed it on Wednesday and you want to catch up, that's where it'll be. We talked about the Signal stuff at length. And I said that between the Signal stuff, the stuff that Trump is doing with these executive orders directed toward these law firms, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation all coming back into the fore. I thought that was all part of the same thing. The signal stuff, in my mind, speaks directly to that period after the 2016 election, the transition period, and then Trump's, the beginning of Trump's first term, where they were spying on the executive office of the president. And I suggested that signal being loaded on to all these government devices might be a route for their spying efforts on this third term of Donald Trump. And all of that would come around to Rico Grande, Russiagate, Hillary Clinton's role in all of that. So I was only a little bit surprised when I saw this morning from the New York Times. Hillary Clinton, this is just dumb. That's the headline on her op-ed for the New York Times today. And she says, it's not the hypocrisy that bothers me. It's the stupidity. We're all shocked that President Trump and his team don't actually care about protecting classified information or federal record retention laws. But we knew that already. What's much worse is that top Trump administration officials put our troops in jeopardy by sharing military plans on a commercial messaging app and unwittingly invited a journalist into the chat. That's dangerous, and it's just dumb. This coming from Hillary Clinton, who noted first and foremost that it's not the hypocrisy that bothers her, which means, of course, that it's not her hypocrisy right now that can bother her either. This is the latest in a string of self-inflicted wounds by the new administration that are squandering America's strength and threatening our national security. Firing hundreds of federal workers charged with protecting our nation's nuclear weapons is also dumb, unless we don't have any. So shutting down efforts to fight pandemics, just as a deadly Ebola outbreak is spreading in Africa, that's also dumb, unless pandemics are bullshit. It makes no sense to purge talented generals, diplomats, and spies at a time when rivals like China and Russia are trying to expand their global reach. Unless, of course, our rivals and enemies are just you, the uniparty, and the global regime, the evil twin worldwide. And China and Russia are just looking after their own interests, as the new multipolar world order would demand. Okay? So she just listed 3 ostensible existential threats indoctrinated into us by the global regime, which I would say, and you don't have to, but I would say simply do not exist. It's a dangerous and complex world, she goes on. She doesn't want America to end up blind and blundering, feeble and friendless. Oh, the alliteration. Who wrote it for you? Hillary? Let's start with the military. Oh, look at that. The Tuskegee Airmen. Don't you understand? That's signaling to everybody out there who knows black. Tuskegee Airmen, black. She's claiming the Trump Pentagon purged images of the plane that dropped the atomic bomb and ended World War II, not because nukes are fake and not because that would be an atrocity, but because its name is Enola Gay. That's dumb. Instead of working with Congress to modernize the military's budget to reflect changing threats, the president is firing top generals without credible justification. Well, that's your opinion, but firing top generals who happen to be working for the global regime and the military-industrial complex, that's a good way to save money. We're shooting ourselves in the head, not the foot, says one former senior spy that Hillary knows is dead on. Not smart, she says. They're reckless. They're reckless. They're firing diplomats and destroying USAID. She's visited all these countries, and she knows how valuable it is for our country to be represented on the ground in far-flung places. That's right. She wants the State Department The CIA, she wants the evil twin faction to have U.S. military and intelligence support in every country around the globe, because we're Team America World Police, and we make sure that those countries remain under regime control at all times. Trump is threatening that and taking that away. So Bill the Thrill is very upset. Let's just get down to the end here. All of this is both dumb and dangerous, says Hillary. And I haven't even gotten to the damage Mr. Trump is doing by cozying up to dictators like Russia's Vladimir Putin, blowing up our alliances, force multipliers that extend our reach and share our burdens, and trashing our moral influence by undermining the rule of law at home, or how he's tanking our economy and blowing up our national debt. Propagandists in Beijing and Moscow know we are in a global debate about competing systems of governance. Yes, and the good twin in America, along with those governments and others around the world, have won that argument. The multipolar world is emerging. There's nothing that the unipolarists, the unipolar bears can do about it. People and leaders around the world are watching to see if democracy can still deliver peace and prosperity or even function. The answer is no, it can't. Sorry about your democracy. If America is ruled like a banana republic with flagrant corruption and a leader who puts himself above the law, we lose that argument. Yes, that is dead on accurate, and you just did that a couple years ago. We also lose the qualities that have made America exceptional and indispensable. If there's a grand strategy at work here, I don't know what it is. Well, hey, Hillary, maybe that's dumb, because I know what it is. My audience knows what it is. Donald Trump knows what it is. He tells us over and over again, as do all these other leaders around the world. You can know what it is. You just don't. That's just because you're dumb. Or you're playing dumb, which means you're lying. And come on, that's what it is. Maybe Mr. Trump wants to return to 19th century spheres of influence. Yes, early 19th century. Maybe he's just driven by personal grudges and is in way over his head. Nah. As a businessman, he bankrupted his Atlantic City casinos. Now he's gambling with the national security of the United States. Oh, so clever. If this continues, a group chat foul will be the least of our concerns, and all the fist and flag emojis in the world won't save us. Oh, Hillary, you nailed them. They're so dumb. You're so smart. You're so irresponsible. Let us pause. Unati O.C. Unati O.C. That's what the name is. $2. It's pronounced Unati. The end is O.C. Unati is from the isiZulu language. Well, very cool. I just learned that. And if you tell me what it means, don't rumble rant. You don't have to give me money to tell me what it means. But I would like to know what it means. And then I will be interested if I see your comment there. Jonathan 121878, $10. Thank you for your interesting commentary. Well, thank you for your attention, your support, and your financial support. And the Dark, $5. Thanks, Chris, for all you do. Thank you. Let us continue. Where are we? Okay, so let's tear through a couple of these really quickly, because I want to just give the minimum possible attention to the biggest story of the week, because the biggest story of the week, as is true with all big stories, it's mostly bullshit. And it's not. The story at the heart of the story is fine, okay? The story. Let's know the story. We can know some of the details of the story, all good. But that doesn't mean we need to invest all our time and energy in all the noise around the story and the recycling of the story. Let's tell the official story within the central narrative over and over and over again. And you can tell an info op, an intentionally planned series of narrative steps, because there will be one minute detail that emerges, one new thing, and within the story about that new thing, they will retell the entirety of the official narrative from the perspective of the regime, and they'll do it over and over again. And each day there's a new important detail in a headline in order to reassert the official story within the central narrative, make sure that absolutely everybody believes it. They want 100% saturation throughout the public getting the official story within the central narrative. Okay? And so this was the news story yesterday in the morning, or maybe it was Wednesday night. How did this happen? Mike Waltz exposed hundreds of contacts after leaving Venmo public. And this is the Gateway Pundit. The same organization that, along with Scott Pressler, let us know that there's no way that election in Pennsylvania was rigged. Nothing's been done to make our elections real. And Pennsylvania's elections are always rigged, but not that one. And the Gateway Pundit, for some reason, just knows that. It's not that it's a clickbait site with owners who really don't know anything. It's definitely not that. It's that they just know these certain things. And so now they're involved in the anti-Mike Waltz op. Now, I'm not pro-Mike Waltz or anti-Mike Waltz. I don't care. And I don't have a vendetta against the Gateway Pundit. I believe at times in the last few years, it has been a valuable news outlet and one that I've spent plenty of time as a reader. But what's going on here? The Venmo thing, it's from Wired, and it goes through a story about how they checked out his Venmo account. His Venmo account isn't private, so therefore it exposes other contacts. This happened to Joe Biden in 2021, and of course it wasn't a big deal then, but now it's a big deal, and Mike Waltz should be held accountable. And again, I don't care about Mike Waltz. One way or the other, it doesn't matter to me. And it's weird because Mike Waltz's wife was in Trump administration number 1, and Mike Waltz's wife's sister is the nominee for Surgeon General, and she also seemed to be a COVID supporter, if I recall. So the whole thing is strange. The whole fantasy team was strange. Everybody was like, don't you trust Trump? Oh, yeah, I trust him, but can we be honest about how strange the fantasy team is? Why is it okay now to question Mike Waltz, but it wasn't okay then? It was okay with the Epstein files to question Pam Bondi, but it wasn't okay then. It's mind-blowing. And of course, it's now okay to question Mike Pence, but it's not okay to question J.D. Vance, even though J.D. Vance has as much legitimacy as Joe Biden and Kamala. It's bananas. And, it just so happens that JD's owner, Peter Thiel, is involved with a Defense Department, CIA-linked, DARPA-linked technology company that gets everybody's information. There's just that. Oh, yeah. And that particular guy was screaming at Reid Hoffman of Epstein Island fame, and also one of those tech guys from way back who's linked to all that stuff. At a billionaire confab, they got into a screaming match over martyring Donald Trump. And then 2 days later was assassination event number 1. And then 2 days after that, J.D. Vance was named as the running mate in the fake campaign leading up to the fake election by Donald Trump on Truth Social in a post that was like a sentence long. On the same day, that video leaked of Donald Trump talking to RFK about teaming up. But oh yeah, J.D. Vance. Oh yeah, he's the successor to Donald Trump. We should all grovel, even though Donald Trump said he's not the successor. But whatever. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I don't trust Trump. Why don't you trust Trump? Clown show. Find another tree to bark up. People who make those kinds of complaints, because I don't care. You're wasting your time and you're making yourselves look stupid. Okay. Let us continue. So everything is getting blamed on this staffer named Alex Wong. And they are the regime, the Uniparty, in order to exact some narrative concessions and maybe some real concessions, is trying to say you need to apply the same standards. This DHS staffer who accidentally added a reporter to a group email got fired for doing so, but you're not doing it with Mike Waltz. You're not doing it with Alex Wong, whatever. They're mad that the DHS employee, here it is, the DHS employee, this is NBC News, who was put on leave did not speak to NBC News. The officials who did speak didn't want to identify her out of fear she would face retaliation from members of the public who are pro-immigration enforcement. Clown show. That is obviously bullshit. Nobody's going to go find a DHS staffer and do something to them. What are they going to do? Say bad things for a day on Twitter before they forget? The DHS employee told colleagues she accidentally added a reporter from a conservative Washington-based print publication to an email that included information about upcoming ICE operations in the Denver area. Okay, so we are meant to believe the media take that they have reported this correctly and that the people who told them that it was an accidental release to that journalist must have been telling the truth. Okay, so we're meant to already assume the official story and then get upset that the same standard isn't being applied in SignalGate. Or we can suspect, hey, maybe this particular staffer was sending that story out to stop that immigration raid, to actually expose operational details. So that was punished, whereas the people responsible for knowing all the things and choosing the punishments don't see this situation in the same way. And it is entirely under their purview to do that. These people are crazy. This stuff used to work like magic, okay? All I care about is that we can see through these things. Now, there is Senate pressure from the GOP side to remove Pete Hegseth. GOP lawmakers turn up the pressure on Hegseth, according to The Hill. So Hegseth had nothing to do with the adding of Jeffrey Goldberg. He wrote some texts in the chain. We're told that those were the important attack plans. They're no longer war plans. They're attack plans, but they never really gave details. They didn't give sources and methods, but they didn't want Hegseth in there to begin with. So, of course, there's a new effort to get Hegseth out from all the people you might suspect. Neocon and warmonger Roger Wicker. He said the information as published recently appears to me to be of such a sensitive nature, based on my knowledge, I would have wanted it classified. Well, therefore, because he says that, that's almost the same as it being classified, which means that Pete Hegseth did something wrong in discussing it. Therefore, Pete Hegseth must resign. And so we've seen those efforts from the neocons over the last week, from the Republican establishment over the last week, because these people are controlled by the military-industrial complex and the uniparty establishment. I said the other day, Bill Kristol, like King Neocon, called for Hegseth to be fired, said that was going to happen today. To my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. Someone can correct me, though the business day is basically over. The news day is not. They wanted him removed and to be replaced with Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton, fellow neocon, seems to be getting exposed as such to the American public, even though Fox News told us Tom Cotton was like the staunchest of staunch Republicans, the most conservative of conservative Republicans, and the most military of military Republicans. It's like they were trying to make him a new national candidate, a potential presidential candidate, put him in the mix at some point. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen. This is from the National Pulse today. Neocon editors are rushing to defend Mike Waltz, which is not good for him. Now that is an interesting spin. So they're defending Mike Waltz, the guy that added Jeffrey Goldberg, and they want Pete Hegseth out there. So the same group of people, or people that are inextricably linked. You can't separate Commentary's neocons from the Atlantic's neocons or the National Review's neocons or Fox News' neocons, okay? The conservative establishment is basically a group that works cohesively to advance the uniparty right agenda in the United States and oppose Donald Trump at all times. And Commentary is a very anti-Trump neocon outlet. And it's not like they're hiding it. They admit they're neocons. I actually interviewed one of them, Noah Rothstein, in 2020, in the summer of 2020, talking about them being neoconservatives. And I, at the time, was listening to Commentary and listening to National Review because it was like in that stage where I was like, what are these Republicans? It seems like maybe there's something to this. So we're not going to spend too much time on this, but you can check out this article in Raheem Kassam's National Pulse, and I would recommend it to you. So they're going after Hegseth. They are defending Mike Waltz. We are being told by Semaphore that the Fight Club mentality is growing. Trump avoids firings as pressures grow. This is about Steve Bannon and his declaration that no one's going to be fired. They need to stand up to the media. And by standing up to the media, they don't mean just winning the narrative. They mean this is a media operation to remove people from Trump's administration. They're trying to turn the pressure up so high that they can get rid of these people who are doing what Trump wants them to do and replace them with members of the establishment. The media isn't an independent, objective, journalistic institution. It is part of the opposition. Bannon said, the lessons of Mike Flynn are resonating in this, and has described the president's policy as a no scalps policy. They're not going to allow the media or the establishment, be it uniparty left or uniparty right, to get the scalps of members of Trump's administration. All right. Wow. We are barreling through things. We're going to have, oh gosh, we're not barreling through nearly fast enough. This is from 2020. Maybe, when was it? The article's from 2024, but these are posts from Elon that are considerably older, I believe. I thought there was something here older than that. Oh, here it is. Elon on January 7th of 2021, the day after, or maybe the day of, no, I think it was the day before. I think it was January 6th. In that afternoon, Parler was shut down, cut off from Amazon Web Services. People were looking for ways to text in secure ways. That might have been the day I quit WhatsApp for good. But Elon said back then, use Signal. And so this article is from last year, May 2024, about Catherine Marr being on the board of Signal. And Elon said there are known vulnerabilities with Signal that are not being addressed. Seems odd. So that was strange that he would put out the message to use Signal in 2021 and then update that a few years later. Interesting additional piece of information, if nothing else. And here is the non-successor J.D. Vance opining on his role in SignalGate. I believe that I have that. Where did I? J.D. Vance excusing his messages. Where did I put it? Sometimes I will rug myself by mislabeling. Darn, I was certain that I had that. I think that I have blown it. Hold for processing just for a moment and let me see if I can get that back. I would like to be able to play it because I thought that it was quite interesting. And I do wonder where it has gone. Here it is. Maybe I only... Here we go. Apologies about that hold for processing.
Atlantic. We've had a couple questions on Greenland. I feel like you've answered that. But I did want to ask, did you express your concerns to the president that you were opposed to the Houthi strike? And also, what did you mean when you asked, or when you said in that thread that the president wasn't aware that his directions for Yemen were inconsistent with his message on Europe?
Well, I didn't quite say that. I think that's a slight misunderstanding of what I said, but
He basically said exactly that. That reporter did a fine job of representing his remarks. And of course, they make JD look bad, so he's saying that's not what he said. And then he, of course, pivots.
We've talked, of course, in the American media about SignalGate, as I called it, for the past week. And here's what I told the president and the entire national security team is that, yes, it is in the interest of the United States of America to preserve navigation. Yes, it is in the interest of the United States to kill terrorists who are preventing navigation in the Red Sea. But we got to make sure that we do it right. We have to be careful. We have to make sure the timing is right. And of course, what that leak revealed, I think, is a private communication between the president's senior advisors about how best to prepare the American people for what we all thought we had to do, about the right timing of when we should do something, and of course, surfacing the strategic questions that we needed to decide and brief the president on so that he could ultimately make the decision about what we would do. What I saw in that signal chat, and of course what I've seen in the president's senior national security team, is that sometimes we all agree and sometimes we all disagree, but it's important that we all have an honest conversation amongst ourselves and with the president of the United States about what we think is the best interest of the national security of the United States of America. I support the president's decision to strike the Houthis. I always supported the president's decision to strike the Houthis, and I support the national security team having the argument about how best to serve the American people.
I mean, to be fair, he said they could wait a month. So I don't know how else to take those comments. I don't know why J.D. Vance would need to brief the president on national security issues. Can anyone figure that out for me? Where are the JD fans out there? Can a JD fan, one of you grovelers out there, can you tell me what he's talking about there? Why would JD Vance need to brief the president on national security issues? Why is JD Vance involved with anything related to national security at all? Is that the vice president's role? I've never known the vice president to have an advisory role on national security matters to the commander in chief. Now, if Donald Trump has tasked J.D. Vance with doing that, okay. I haven't seen anything about that. I've never had any reason to believe that's true. I can't imagine that Donald Trump and the real generals, not the TV generals, are talking to, are needing J.D. Vance's advice. Like, are the real generals talking to J.D. first and being like, hey, J.D., why don't you throw this around in a group chat with Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard? What? I said we were going to see weird stuff with the fantasy team. I made fun of these people. People got mad. What are we seeing? It's crazy to me. Like, this, they're showing us this. It's being shown for a reason. J.D. Vance is going around and doing photo ops with military groups every day for a reason. Usha was supposed to go to Greenland and have like these important meetings with members of the Greenlandic community. But that's not what they did. They just went and visited formerly Thule Air Force Base. Now I think it's called Pitturuk or something like that, Space Force Base. And so you see him with guys in military fatigues lined up behind him. Photo op. That was a terrible answer. I don't know how else to read that. If somebody has a better explanation, by all means, go ahead and send it my way. But J.D. Vance going to J.D. Vance. This is the Wall Street Journal reprinted in MSN. Israel supplied intelligence in airstrike discussed in Signal chat, officials say. I said the other day that I don't even take it for granted that a strike occurred, okay? I'm not saying a strike did not occur. I'm saying I don't take that for granted. So I am going to analyze the situation, not only in the sense that strikes occurred, but also in the sense where I understand the possibility that nothing happened and all of this is bullshit, Trojan horsed and smuggled through a journalist they knew they could hoodwink because he would post anything he could to make the Trump administration look bad. So here's another step. Now, if anything about releasing that chat or releasing those details threatened something Israel was going to do, or the deep state in Israel, the military-industrial complex, the global regime worldwide, were going to do vis-a-vis Yemen, vis-a-vis the Houthis, vis-a-vis Iran, and it disrupted that, then perhaps that was the purpose of the op. Because what we are getting right now in a global sense is the lead up, the saber rattling to lead up to Israel attacking Tehran, okay? Which I would suspect we will probably see that or something similar, reports of that, I should say, next week on Liberation Day. They're going to need a big display to distract from the other big display. Be prepared for that sort of thing. Know it's going to happen, but I know that when it does happen, it's going to be a false flag. How do we know that? Because they're telling us to expect it and telling us to understand that certain elements were in play that led up to that narrative being released. Are the elements in themselves provable, confirmable, or any of that? No, they're not. Okay? So when they put all those elements together, that you're like 50-50 on each one of them, well, I guess it could be true, but it doesn't sound true. There's no reason to believe it's true, but I guess it could be true. You're 50-50 on all those things? Well, they're going to say, you know all those 7 stories we told you that you're 50-50 about? Well, now this attack happened. Look at this video. Therefore, not only is this thing real, all those 7 stories are real together, which makes this thing real. They're the support for this story. Now you have to believe all of it. You conspiracy theorist. How about that? We got you again. That's how these narrative ops work. When you see through the narrative op, you no longer fall for it. That's what my purpose is. Okay? So we don't have the time to go through all of this article. Walz didn't describe the sources of the intelligence, but said in another text that the U.S. has multiple positive IDs. And they're talking about this guy who walked into his girlfriend's apartment building, and then they blew the shit out of the apartment building. The U.S. also received intelligence about targets struck in the attack from surveillance drones flying over Yemen, defense officials say. Now, all of this is premised on the Houthis attacking U.S. assets last year. We went through some of that last year. The stories from last year have that 50-50 quality. Did this thing actually happen? No. It was always, oh, they struck 3 or 3 were killed or blah, blah, blah. And if you actually pull at those threads on those stories, you pretty quickly find out that they're not what they made them out to be. In fact, one of the stories, they were like, oh, yeah, it wasn't even the Houthis. But still, it's all justified. It's all real, blah, blah, blah. Here is what I find interesting. The Biden administration sought last year to develop options to strike senior Houthi military and political leaders and approach the Israelis and Saudis for help, according to people familiar with the classified planning. It didn't decide to carry out those strikes, but the work on those options appeared to have given the Trump administration a start in developing targets for their May 15th strike on Houthi militants in Yemen. So the thing that was supposed to happen last year and could have happened last year just happened, and that's what Jeffrey Goldberg has told us about. And because of SignalGate now, we all believe that it definitely happened. It's all premised on bullshit stories, and it itself might be a bullshit story, but we did see videos, and now there's this Goldberg thing, and all the TV characters and our future leader who we grovel before say it's real. So, and Trump announced it, and Trump never says things to manipulate regime narratives and take control of those regime narratives, except for the fact he does that absolutely all the time. So we should just accept that the TV story is correct about all this, even though it's never correct about anything else. Nailed it. Oh, we're crushing it. A perfect epistemology for a truther to have. Hey, I've got all these other unbelievable stories. If I put them all together, it forms a real story. All right. Let us continue. We're not going to get anywhere close to where I wanted to get, I don't think. Maybe we will. Let's just give it our best. But first, this message from Rumble. And we're going to talk one of my favorite subjects, which is coffee. Weak coffee is for the weak. And at Rumble, weak has never been a part of the mission. No fillers, no fraud, and no settling for mediocrity, just like 1775 coffee. It's single origin, small farm, hands-picked, specialty grade coffee that stands for quality, free speech, and calling out BS when it matters. And that is what we do here on the free speech platform of Rumble. Forget stale, mass-produced beans roasted just enough to hide the flaws. Dark roast hits like a Trump tariff. Medium roast keeps it bold without the bitterness. And Vitality Mushroom blend, real energy and lasting focus, no synthetic garbage. For K-Cup pods, whole bean, or fresh ground coffee, go to 1775coffee.com. Use code STUDIO for 15% off and start your morning with coffee that stands for something. Oh, and every dollar spent enters you to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 in cash. Nailed it. Thanks, Rumble. Get some coffee if you want. If you don't want, don't do it. Okay. Let us continue. This is Donald Trump talking about what is going to happen in Iran if the situation progresses.
Attacking Ukraine every day.
Let's say
Iranian drones are attacking and killing Ukrainians every day. Why aren't you doing something about that?
Well, we're going to see what happens with that. I'm getting reports on that, and we're looking at a report. You're right. They make a lot of drones. Iran makes a lot of drones. They make very effective drones, too. They do very effectively at some things, but Iran is very high on my list of things to watch. And as you probably know, I sent them a letter just recently, and I said, you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other, and we're going to either have to talk and talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran, and I don't want that to happen. Big preference, and I don't say this through strength or weakness, my big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Come on, guys.
And as I said, this is what's being, this is the saber rattling that's going on. It's going to lead up to some narrative next week, I would suspect, but we shall see. Okay, let us talk about Venezuela. We have spent ample time on Venezuela, the migrant situation, Tren de Aragua, and the court proceedings involving revolving around all of that. The Associated Press, Trump asks Supreme Court for permission to resume deporting Venezuelan migrants under wartime law. The Trump administration on Friday asked the Supreme Court for permission to resume deportations of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador under an 18th century wartime law while a court fight continues. The emergency appeal to the High Court follows a rejection of the Republican administration's plea to federal appeals court in Washington. By a 2-1 vote, a panel of appellate judges left in place an order temporarily prohibiting deportations of migrants under the rarely used Alien Enemies Act. The Justice Department argued in court papers that federal courts shouldn't interfere with sensitive diplomatic negotiations. It also claimed that migrants should make their case in a federal court in Texas where they are being detained. And the dissenting judge in that case, his dissent was partially based on that. They were in Texas. The law said they should file in Texas and that the case should be adjudicated in Texas, but instead they moved it without cause to the D.C. District Court. So we are going to see all of this challenged, or at least some of these aspects challenged in the Supreme Court. Cheers to that. And I am glad that is happening. Wendy B. Smith in the chat, $20 Rumble rant. You're teaching us how to see the BS right away, like learning to see the magic eye images where you get your eyes just right and then bam, the 3D image pops out. BS just pops out now. Thanks, Chris. That is exactly my intent. I think that is a wonderful analogy. They're like impossible to see when you first start looking at them. And then you kind of just figure out how to see the background behind the foreground and like cross your eyes a little bit. And then it eventually works. So anyway. Okay. Let us continue. The New York Post spazzed out this morning. Vladimir Putin threatens to finish off Ukrainian troops after warmongers' bold violation of U.S.-backed partial ceasefire. So we have had headlines this week about how Ukraine and Russia have both violated the ceasefire using drone attacks on one another. And do we know that, quote unquote, Ukraine is attacking Russia or that Russia is attacking, quote unquote, Ukraine? No, we don't. If there is any kinetic action at all, we should assume that in every place around the world, it is global good twin versus global evil twin. Now, once you do that, once you are only looking through good twin, evil twin, rather than country name A versus country name B, it's like, oh, all the kinetic stuff is happening because of the regime, either because they are attacking and being responded to, or, well, I guess that would be the either. They are attacking of their own accord, or they are being responded to by countries like Russia. And I would assume the same thing is true to the extent anything kinetic is going on with the Houthis or Iran or in Gaza or anywhere else. That's what's happening. The regime is trying to create the reasons for the U.S. to be drawn into war. They are trying to create World War II over their next Israel that they're trying to take over in full, Ukraine. It was their original Israel, if you know what I mean. And I'm not saying it was the original Israel, but the Israel now is also not the original Israel. So, global regime proxy states, they don't want to lose the one that is right in the ancestral seat of the Khazarian Empire and the Khazarian Mafia. The BBC, Zelensky buoyant, but Europe will struggle to guarantee Ukraine's security. Yes, that is because all our Ukrainian allies are weak and feckless and have no ability to protect Ukraine to the extent that Ukraine is a real thing and not just a global regime proxy state. And of course, it is just a global regime proxy state. President Volodymyr Zelensky was in a buoyant mood when I met him in Paris with a panel of 3 other European journalists. He had interrupted a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron at the Élysée Palace and went back there for what he called a tête-à-tête dinner after the interview. Macron had not just rolled out the red carpet for him. The Eiffel Tower behind Zelensky in a picture window as we talked in one of Paris's great museums was lit up in yellow and blue, the colors of the Ukrainian flag. The French wanted him to feel as if he was among friends. Zelensky had come to Paris to meet leaders and diplomats from 30 other countries who are working out what they can contribute to the coalition of the willing, the group that UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are trying to organize to offer Ukraine security guarantees if there is a long-term ceasefire. And I think we had a picture of it down here somewhere, the Eiffel Tower. Oh, apparently not. But there is Zelensky in his sweatsuit, being all buoyant, attracting his compadres in Europe. This is Badlands Media Today. Putin proposes temporary administration in Ukraine to facilitate elections and peace accords. Actually, you know what? Hold on for 1 second. I think that there was a really funny part. Darn. CanCon shared something this morning, and I thought maybe it was in that BBC article. But they were mocking the idea that there were referenda held in Crimea, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye to become part of Russia. But there were referenda held, and they're just part of Russia. And they've all been part of Russia for years now, even though we're continually told that they are Ukraine, and that might become and might remain Ukraine, that Ukraine's going to defeat Russia, and then they'll have to pull out, and that'll be Ukrainian territory. No, it won't. Putin proposes temporary administration in Ukraine to facilitate elections and peace accords. A temporary administration could be introduced in Ukraine under the auspices of the UN, the United States, European countries, and our partners, Putin said while speaking with seamen at the port. This would be in order to hold democratic elections and to bring to power a capable government enjoying the trust of the people, and then to start talks with them about a peace treaty. Well, okay. They don't have that now. They don't have really any government there now. They have the comedic actor still pretending to be president outside of his mandate. His term has ended. New elections. What was I going to say? Yeah, the new government was never put in place because the elections were canceled by Zelensky. And now Putin is recommending an interim government be put in place to handle the country in their transition period. And maybe this is the article. CanCon added for me, this is the article. CanCon added for me that Eiffel Tower article that really paints a picture for the European relationship. They're still going for symbolism and the romantic notion that our democracy in Ukraine will survive. Ah, darn it, look what I did. Here we are. This is the Telegraph UK from yesterday. Trump's plan to force Ukraine to restore Putin's gas empire. Donald Trump is holding a gun to the head of Volodymyr Zelensky, demanding huge reparations payments and laying claim to half of Ukraine's oil, gas, and hydrocarbon resources, as well as almost all its metals and much of its infrastructure. It's an expropriation document, said Alan Riley, an expert on energy law at the Atlantic Council. There are no guarantees, no defense clauses. The U.S. puts up nothing. The Americans can walk away. The Ukrainians can't. I've never seen anything like it before. And I noted to CanCon this morning, and this was why I wanted to highlight this article today, that globalists have seen something like this before. It's an absolute necessity that they must have seen something like this before, because this was the status quo ante. It's just that all of this infrastructure, all of these industries, and all of these resources were fully under the control of the global regime. Ukraine was a global regime proxy state, riddled with corruption, crime, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, the bioweapons labs, ethnic civil war, and Ukrainian Nazi armies trained by the CIA. Okay? So they've actually seen this situation for a decade, since the post-Maidan period, when George Soros and the International Monetary Fund flooded money into Ukraine to set up global regime-oriented businesses connected with the World Economic Forum. They were installing the regime and the corporate structure that supports that regime in place. That's how all the money comes in, the citizenry of that country. If they are amenable to control by the global regime, they are happy about the economic influx, and they do not oppose the global regime on behalf of sovereign nationality and nationalism for their country. That is the regime agenda in every country. That is how they take over. So they built that infrastructure and that apparatus in Ukraine, and now Donald Trump is simply taking it from them. And we've discussed this a few times, but it is very similar to the way I view Twitter. It was government infrastructure controlled by the regime, and Elon Musk did not buy it. It was simply transferred. He's now the face of it. The information weapon was seized. It's not possible to buy for $44 billion. The greatest information weapon in world history from billionaires who use it to control the world and control markets. Similarly, we don't need all this nonsense war narrative for Trump to take from the global regime what they had set up in Ukraine, right? The global regime was controlled ultimately by central bankers and the U.S. military at the end of the line of escalation. Trump controls the U.S. military. He is removing the economic control from the global bankers. So it would make sense that it would be awfully easy to simply snatch that infrastructure, return it to the people, and that seems to be the endgame scenario for the Ukraine narrative agenda at large. Keir Starmer has determined it necessary to put a deadline on Putin. Starmer calls for deadline on Ukraine peace talks to stop Putin's quote-unquote games. This is from The Standard in UK. Okay? So we are getting the back and forth. Russia doesn't want to do it. Ukraine doesn't want to do it. Then they both agree to the deal that's already happened and is, as I said, just a return to the status quo ante, but minus the regime control, just as everything else might ultimately be, then minus the bankers. The deal's on, then it's off, then it's on, then it's off, then it's on, then it's off. Okay? Then we have a ceasefire. And then Russia attacks, then Ukraine attacks, then Russia attacks, then Ukraine attacks. All these are narrative things. To keep spinning this process out and keep frustrating the regime and keep making it make less and less sense to people so that Ukraine and the regime's interests communicated to the public through the avatar of Ukraine and the comedic actor look more and more ridiculous, okay? As they get beaten worse and worse and worse by Russia, it looks more and more desperate. People are sick of it. They don't want to do it. So the people pitching that we should continue backing Ukraine look more desperate, look more ridiculous, and the process continues to wind out. Starmer wants to call a deadline. He's like, this has got to stop. And that makes sense because they need it to stop. You know who doesn't need it to stop? Us, Russia, and Ukraine. The only people that need it to stop are the global regime and their interests and the countries aligned with the global regime. So Starmer puts this deadline up and whatever. Speaking of Starmer, and this is hilarious, Sir Kerr posted this in January. Knife crime is at epidemic levels and is ruining lives across Britain. As Prime Minister, I'll crack down on sales of these lethal weapons once and for all. When I announce a ban, you'll get a ban. And yesterday he followed that up with, confirmed, ninja swords will be banned by this summer. When we promise action, we take it. Ninja swords. Just going to take away your ninja swords, I guess. Japan has ninja swords, probably more than the UK. I'm not sure there is an outbreak of mass violence due to ninja sword, even in Japan, where they're present. And I know what you're thinking. Well, that's because there's so many in Japan that a good guy with a ninja sword can stop a bad guy with a ninja sword, which provides a deterrence from mass violence via ninja sword. And I get it. That makes complete and total sense, just like it does here for guns. Here is the veritable monster, quote unquote, King Charles. King admitted to hospital over side effects from cancer treatment. How could that be? And he was discharged. I guess he's doing fine or relatively fine right now. In a rare public statement about his health, Buckingham Palace said, following scheduled and ongoing medical treatment for cancer this morning, the king experienced temporary side effects that required a short period of observation in the hospital. His Majesty's afternoon engagements were therefore postponed. His Majesty has now returned to Clarence House, and as a precautionary measure, acting on medical advice, tomorrow's diary program will also be rescheduled. His Majesty would like to send his apologies to all those who may be inconvenienced or disappointed as a result. Well, it's awfully weird that the quote-unquote king is doing this right as he's about to make the secret offer allowing us to join the currently collapsing and embarrassing British Commonwealth. We also had this headline, which I just felt like quickly including. Democrats staged hush-hush talks in 2023 for Biden to withdraw from race, says book. How about that? Shocking. They also, this was from Wednesday, in The Guardian. The new book also reports Harris's aides strategized around the possibility that, quote unquote, Biden might, quote unquote, die in, quote unquote, office. And all three of those are only potentially true. Was it Biden? Is he alive? Well, if it's not Biden, Biden can't die. So that part's questionable. And was he in office? Obviously not. But narratively speaking, sure, all that could have happened. And maybe they were planning for that or hoping for that or something. And I found that amusing at the very, very least. What else do we have here? We are barreling toward the end at full speed. And you know what? We're going to skip Canada. Let's just do Greenland really quick because it's so funny. And of course, the non-successor is visiting today. And here is JD doing a photo op and being very based and red-pilled, very podcast bro-ish.
Hey guys, how we doing? Please, at ease. At ease. Good Lord, sit down and eat. Sit down and eat. Don't let the vice president stop you guys from getting your chow here. How we doing? It's cold as shit here. Nobody told me. Well, thank you all for everything you do, and thanks for having us. So please sit down, guys. Please. I want you to eat your food. Usha and I are thrilled to be here. It's a really beautiful flight, actually. You fly over some pretty cool spots. I've never been.
Believe whatever you like. I think I have a Greenland clip from Donald Trump about what's going on with Greenland.
We need Greenland, very importantly, for international security. We have to have Greenland. It's not a question of, do you think we can do without it? We can. If you look at Greenland right now, if you look at the waterways, you have Chinese and Russian ships all over the place. And we're not going to be able to do that. We're not relying on Denmark or anybody else to take care of that situation.
All about the waterways. China and Russia are up there. We're going to need Greenland so that we can control the other half. And that is how things are going to be equalized when it comes to the trade routes around the North Pole in the North Seas. As we've been saying for months, it seems like it's becoming very clear that that is what is going to happen, or some agreement will be made so that we have the access to be able to do that. We're having the narrative played out. And by the way, who knows what kind of nonsense he might be thwarting with all of this Greenland stuff based on whatever the original agenda would have called for from the other side. Now, one of the major headlines of the morning was an earthquake in Myanmar, formerly Burma. Here is some video, and you are supposed to not only be horrified, but understand that everything is happening is incontestably real. Now, horrifying. We're watching a building collapse and we're seeing some shaking and rumbling. As a person who spent many years in Southern California, I've experienced an earthquake or two in my time. Nothing nearly as severe as this, but, you know, some rattling in the house, some shaking, some rumbling, some vibration. I'm familiar with that stuff. Again, this is clearly more severe, but there are some elements of this story that are a bit weird. And I just want to share a couple of those elements. This is CNN. Powerful quake rocks Myanmar. At least 144 people were killed and more than 730 injured after a 7.7 magnitude quake struck near the city of Mandalay, according to the head of Myanmar's military government, who warned that casualties are likely to rise. And so immediately it's a military government. Buildings collapse in Bangkok. The quake triggered the collapse of buildings hundreds of miles away in Thailand. At least 10 people have died in the nation's capital, and dozens are believed to be trapped under the rubble of an under construction high-rise, officials said. Bangkok is 600 plus miles away from Mandalay. We are supposed to believe an earthquake, even a strong earthquake, can knock buildings down 600 miles away? I have a very hard time believing that. But then here's the most interesting part in my mind. Myanmar, one of Asia's poorest nations, is reeling from a civil war sparked by a 2021 military coup. Weak infrastructure makes it ill-equipped to deal with major natural disasters. Swaths of the country are run by a patchwork of militias, making it extremely difficult to gather reliable information. Now, we've been talking about Myanmar since 2020 or 2021 because they seem to have thwarted successfully a color revolution in Myanmar and frozen the assets of the Soros organizations and the color revolution financial funding infrastructure in Myanmar. They detained, arrested, and imprisoned Aung San Suu Kyi. I hope I'm saying that right. The Obama and Hillary and Soros-linked, quote-unquote, elected president of Myanmar. And if you're able to do all those things with your, quote-unquote, military government in place, then not only have you successfully gotten the global regime out of your country, which makes the global regime much weaker than people imagine, it also suggests that you have extremely powerful military backing, probably from China, but maybe from India or Russia or someone else, but probably from China. And that would also mean that China is keeping the global regime out, which a lot of people are just unable to deal with because I know China bad. And part of China is definitely bad, just like part of the United States is definitely bad. All right? That's what the good twin, evil twin analysis allows us to see through rather than getting stuck at China bad. Okay? So we're being told that the effort to assist in the recovery from this awful earthquake, this very natural disaster, is going to be hindered because the global regime is not in control of Myanmar. Someone else is. And so we should blame the military government for how poor Myanmar is and how unstable it is in responding to crises like this. And there is actually another one in this nation's military leader makes a rare call for help. But let us go down. Could take years to recover because the humanitarian effort will not be sent in. There's a strange picture. Oh, man. This is the problem when they do these live articles. There's only one link for all of this, and they keep updating. Oh, they got an influencer. 33rd floor of her apartment building. Wow. Myanmar earthquake, strongest the country has seen in over 100 years. Moving down, strange, weird picture. Same one. Gosh, man. The U.S. Embassy in Myanmar says it is suspending non-emergency services. That is quite interesting. The U.S. will help, according to Trump. Man, it's killing my punchline here. Here it is. Quake comes with Myanmar grappling with the loss of $52 million in U.S. aid. And they are saying USAID programs. So not only is it the military coup that is threatening them, but at the same time, this Myanmar researcher from Amnesty International says at the same time, the impacts of U.S. aid cuts on humanitarian services in the country are just starting to bite. And they're talking about nonprofit organizations like CARE. Give me a break. So the regime is upset, and they are using this very natural disaster to make it clear to the world that that the lack of regime presence in Myanmar is going to make all these things so much worse. It's amazing. So the big picture is highly visible, and we have a very natural disaster to cover the big picture and to destabilize the anti-regime efforts in Myanmar. And on our way out, let us celebrate a bit from the so-called military coup, along with the dancing girl from Myanmar. This was the original video. This is one great way to know a country is not enduring a military coup, despite the global state propaganda media narratives to suggest otherwise. Pieces of content like this are put out to let us know, oh, hey, something else is happening. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Here is another, because, of course, that video and that girl in particular went super viral and were repurposed in an incredible number of memes. You got to love it. You got to love it. And the reason I bring that up is to hit one last story, then get us out of here. This is the Wall Street Journal from Monday. Turkey's Erdogan blames opposition for violent protests. Now, every time we see the word opposition, we know exactly what that means. The opposition is always the evil twin faction when the evil twin is not in power. 99% of the time, when you see mainstream media reporting about the opposition, that's who they're talking about. So, demonstrators have turned out every day for nearly a week to decry the arrest of the Turkish president's chief political rival. Okay? So this is the same thing we saw in Belarus. It's the same thing we saw in Russia with Alexei Navalny. You can go through color revolution after color revolution after color revolution and see this same thing, right? But, so hold on, let's just do, here it is. The only ones responsible for the police officers injured in the attack of vandals, the shopkeepers whose windows and frames were broken, and the billions of liras of public property damaged are the main opposition party leader and his followers. Okay? So this guy's named Imamoglu or Imamoglu. I'm not sure what the Turkish pronunciation would be, but then there is one last thing to see. And let's take a look, by the way. Does this look exactly like Portland in the summer of love? I would suggest that photos like that one do indeed. And one more. Here it is. Oh, come on. The link is dead? Give me a break. All right, so we're just going to look at the picture then. Here is the dancing girl of Myanmar translated to the current color revolution in Turkey. Pikachu, right in the middle of your water cannon color revolution scene. You get a little Pikachu. And Jake Hanrahan, the guy who posted this on X, formerly Twitter, says Pikachu amidst the ongoing protests in Turkey. This is real, by the way. And I said, narrator, this is not real. That is your color revolution indicator. And we will see over the next few weeks that Erdogan is handling, and I'm not an Erdogan fan, all right? It's not about supporting Erdogan. It's about understanding this pattern is real. It's communicated in all the same ways. It's displayed in all the same ways. They do it always for the same purpose. A color revolution is a color revolution is a color revolution. And this is a color revolution. This is a cue that we should understand to show us this is what they're doing. They're trying to make it extra cute. Now, whether this is Ghost in the Machine telling us, hey, this is all a joke, or whether it is people on that side actually showing up like Pikachu, trying to make the thing real cute so that people have they get hit right in their feels. Doesn't matter either way. Color revolution is a color revolution is a color revolution. You can see it happening in country after country after country around the world. It happened here. We should recognize it in 2 seconds so that these things no longer work. And we're going to need them to no longer work if you want people to be swept up and prosecuted and taken off the streets for the next time the domestic terrorists are out there destabilizing our country. Okay? And so we can see this pattern. We know what it means. It's important to recognize it every single time. And with that, I am going to take one final peek at the chat. And that's going to be it on the Rumble Rants. I hope you guys had a good time hanging out. We're going to be back on Monday. I don't know. Do I have any other announcements? I don't believe. I think I got all the announcements out of the way. Let's just do one more ad for Rumble and Rumble associated companies before we get out of here. And I have no qualms ever about doing these ads, because if you follow me on social media, you know that I use only, well, now I'm on YouTube for however long, but I use only alternative platforms. So when I get the opportunity to help Rumble out and help Truth Social out while supporting the places I use, I'm going to do it. So if you're looking for a great place online for news, discussion, and entertainment, then check out Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media website. You'll get breaking news stories and commentary from top media figures. And if you want to see Trump's legendary Truth Social posts Get on Truth Social today. Join a growing community of patriots on a free speech platform designed to avoid censorship and cancellation by big tech. Make your voice heard. Join the movement. Join Truth Social. And we just talked about this the other day. Donald Trump actually does call Truth Social the real voice of America. And I would hope that that's because that is where he is gauging the public response to his agenda without the censorship and interference of those other platforms. And so for those reasons, I think it's important to make your voice heard on Truth Social. Everybody participates in the incentive and punishment structure on Twitter, the party of false decorum as it exists online, thinking that that is where all the important information comes from. It does not, and it does not have to. Twitter is just the new television. The ultimate impact is by communicating things to the president, and then the president using his megaphone and the powers of his office. All right. Attention farming all day long, trying to go viral with hot takes for clicks and follows. That's not maximum impact. Maximum impact is the president. And that's where he is. So I think it makes sense to be over there. And with that, I will be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes, I can't stand to see him in all this pain. You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you. Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in. For the love of God, let the boy move in with you. Good Lord.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the rain.